What if everything you've been taught about business success is actually a complete trap?
I mean, that is quite the hook. But yeah.
Right. But think about that for a second. Every business school case study, every corporate retreat you go to, every single strategy meeting you have ever sat through likely focuses on one obsessive goal.
Beating competition.
Exactly. How to beat the competition. How to be a fraction of a second faster, or, a few pennies cheaper, or maybe just a few decibels louder than the other players in your specific industry.
Which is how everyone operates.
Right. But what if that entire mindset, the very foundation of competitive strategy, is exactly what is artificially capping your growth? What if it's holding you back?
It's a really profound paradigm shift to even consider that, because we are fundamentally conditioned, almost from birth, to view business, and honestly, often life itself, as this zero-sum game.
Yeah, like there's only so much to go around.
Precisely. The underlying assumption is that the market is a finite pie. And therefore, the only way for you to win a larger slice is by, well, making sure someone else loses theirs.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is. Yet, when you actually step back and examine the most spectacular, paradigm-shifting business successes of the modern era, they don't validate that zero-sum theory at all.
Not even a little bit.
In fact, they suggest the exact opposite is true. The greatest triumphs don't come from winning the battle. They come from refusing to fight it altogether.
Refusing to fight it altogether. And that refusal to fight is really the central thesis of what we are unpacking today.
It absolutely is.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring the foundational first chapter of the completely groundbreaking book, Blue Ocean Strategy, by W. Chan Kim and Renee Mauborgne. And the mission for this deep dive is to completely flip the script on traditional competition.
Which is much needed, honestly.
Totally. Over the course of our conversation, you are going to learn how to break out of cutthroat, oversaturated markets and create your own entirely uncontested market space.
Right.
So whether you are, prepping to launch a startup, trying to revitalize a legacy brand, or you are simply someone who wants to understand the hidden mechanics of how modern market dominance is actually achieved, this framework is absolutely vital.
It's essential for anyone playing the game today.
Yeah, because we are not talking about how to beat the competition. We're going to map out how to render them completely irrelevant.
And to do that effectively, we first have to really understand the geography of the market as it is traditionally understood, and then look at how the authors of this strategy completely redraw that map.
What they use it's a highly visual, incredibly sticky metaphor to sort of categorize the entire universe of businesses.
Yeah, they divide every market, every industry, every competitive landscape into two distinct types of oceans: red oceans and blue oceans.
So let's start with the red oceans, because that is where like 99% of businesses currently live and operate, right?
Yes, red oceans represent all the industries that exist today. This is the known market space. In a red ocean, the industry boundaries are strictly defined, they are highly visible, and they are universally accepted by all the players involved.
So everyone knows the rules.
Exactly. The competitive rules of the game are established. You know who your competitors are, you know what the customer expects, and you generally know the price points that the market will bear.
It's the established terrain. So we were talking about, traditional airlines, legacy auto manufacturers, fast food chains, accounting firms. The categories are just really neat and tidy.
Neat, tidy, and very crowded. And because those boundaries are fixed in the red ocean, companies are essentially forced into a constant state of comparison.
Always looking over their shoulder.
Right. They try to outperform their rivals to grab a greater share of a finite existing pool of demand. But, as more companies crowd into that exact same defined space, the prospects for both exponential profit and rapid growth are inevitably reduced.
Because only so much room.
Yeah. Products start to look exactly alike. Services become totally indistinguishable. And here is where the metaphor really earns its name. As the market crowds, companies slash prices and cutthroats to survive, turning the water bloody. Hence, red oceans.
Wow. I often visualize the red ocean strategy like this, like a brutal high-stakes game of musical chairs played by adults.
That's a great way to picture it.
Right. The music stops, everyone frantically scrambles for a seat. But the catch is, the chairs aren't just limited, they're actively disappearing.
Yes.
The overall market space isn't growing proportionately to the number of players. So the only way you secure a seat is by aggressively and physically shoving a competitor out of the way. It's exhausting, it's highly defensive, and it's inherently destructive.
Which stands in stark contrast to the alternative.
The blue oceans.
The blue oceans. These denote all the industries, markets, and subsectors that do not currently exist today.
The unknown.
The totally unknown market space. Blue oceans are characterized by untapped potential, the creation of completely new demand, and the opportunity for highly profitable, sustainable growth.
So competition just isn't even a thing.
It is a non-factor. It is literally irrelevant because the rules of the game haven't even been written yet. The waters are clear, they're deep, and they are totally unexplored.
So if I'm relying on that musical chairs analogy again, instead of, throwing elbows for the last remaining chair in a super crowded room, you simply walk out the back door, find an empty acreage of land, and start constructing an entirely new stadium where you own all the seats.
That captures the essence perfectly. You aren't slicing up existing demand, you are generating new demand entirely out of thin air.
But this naturally invites a massive, glaring question.
I know exactly what you're going to ask.
Right. If blue oceans are so peaceful, if they are so highly profitable, and if they offer this absolutely boundless potential, why is the entirety of the corporate world seemingly obsessed with fighting to the death in the red oceans?
It's the million-dollar question.
Why are millions of smart executives, investors, and entrepreneurs voluntarily choosing to swim in bloody water?
To answer that, we actually have to look backwards. We have to examine the historical and honestly almost psychological roots of modern corporate management.
Okay, lay it on me.
Corporate strategy, as it is taught in universities and practiced in boardrooms all around the world, didn't just emerge in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It has deeply ingrained roots in military strategy.
Wait, you mean like literal battlefield warfare?
Literal warfare. I mean, look closely at the standard vocabulary of business. It is entirely militarized.
Oh, wow. I guess we do have chief executive officers.
Exactly. And they report to headquarters. We put our sales troops on the front lines.
We launch marketing campaigns.
We try to capture market territory. We analyze our targets.
Wow, yeah. It really is everywhere when you start looking for it.
It is. And this isn't just colorful language. It reflects a deeply held cognitive framework that was largely cemented after World War II, when an entire generation of military officers returned home and integrated straight into the corporate hierarchy.
So they literally just brought the rules of war with them into the office.
They did. And military strategy is fundamentally about confronting an opponent and fighting over a fixed, limited piece of land.
Which makes total sense in the context of a physical battle, right? The geography of a war zone doesn't spontaneously change. The hill you are trying to capture is a finite, static piece of dirt. If my battalion controls the hill, yours does not. Is the ultimate zero-sum environment.
But here's the massive, catastrophic logical flaw when executives copy-paste that military framework onto the business universe.
Which is?
The economic terrain is not a fixed piece of land.
Right.
The business universe is constantly expanding. Markets are fluid, they're created, they morph, and they disappear.
So we treat the global economy like it's a fixed pie, and everyone is just fighting for a slice. But the reality is that the pie is constantly expanding, baking new layers and entirely new flavors that literally didn't exist an hour ago.
That's it exactly. And the historical record proves this expanding universe theory beyond any doubt. Look back just 30 to 40 years.
That's so, right.
Consider the industries that are absolutely foundational to the global economy today. Mutual funds, ubiquitous cell phones, massive discount retail chains, biotechnology, minivans.
Overnight express package delivery.
Yes, the entire commercial internet, social media, electric vehicles. 30 or 40 years ago, the vast majority of these multi-billion-dollar industries barely existed, and many didn't exist at all.
They were just blue oceans waiting to be discovered.
Completely.
It's so easy to forget how recent all of this actually is. I remember a time when the idea of paying a premium to have a small cardboard box of, obscure coffee beans flown across the country and left on my doorstep within 24 hours would have seemed like pure science fiction. But now it's an industry standard that employs hundreds of thousands of people. That wasn't a conquered territory. That was a newly created territory.
And the creation of new territory was so rapid and so sweeping in the late 20th century that it fundamentally broke the United States government's ability to even track the economy.
Wait, really? It broke the government tracking?
It did. For half a century, the U.S. Census Bureau used something called the SIC system.
SIE?
Yeah, the Standard Industrial Classification System. They used it to monitor and measure economic activity, but it was heavily biased toward manufacturing and legacy industries.
Because that's what existed when they made it.
Right, but by 1997, the economic landscape had mutated so drastically that the Census Bureau had to completely throw the SIC system in the trash. They replaced it with the NAICS system, the North American Industry Classification System.
Why was the old system so fundamentally broken, though?
Because it possessed absolutely no mathematical capacity to account for the massive explosion of entirely new industry sectors. Under the old system, the services sector was just one broad, generalized category.
Oh, yeah. So just everything that wasn't a factory got dumped in services.
Exactly. Under the new system, that single category had to be exploded into 10 distinct economic sectors. The government literally had to invent new structural classifications just to put a name to the massive blue oceans that entrepreneurs had created over the previous 2 decades.
That is wild. So the market universe visibly expanded. We found all these new oceans. But because managers are trained from day one in the rigid language of war, battling for market share, attacking rivals, defending turf, they keep their gaze locked firmly on the red ocean.
Yes, they accept the artificial constraints of warfare, namely limited terrain and the absolute necessity of destroying an enemy.
And in doing so, they completely blind themselves to the single most distinctive strength of the business world, which is the capacity to create entirely new, uncontested market space without firing a single shot.
It is a profound blind spot. When you view the world through a militaristic lens, you inherently prioritize the destruction of your rival over the creation of value for your buyer.
So for you listening right now, the very first critical step to executing a breakthrough strategy is to audit your own vocabulary and your own mindset.
That's a great point.
Stop using military metaphors to conceptualize your career path, your startup, or your corporate strategy. Because if you convince yourself you are in a war, you will fight a war.
And wars are inherently expensive, bloody, exhausting, and they usually leave the victor just as damaged as the vanquished. You have to recognize that the economic terrain is expansive.
Okay, so that paradigm shift alone is valuable. However, the authors are very clear that seeking out blue oceans isn't just some philosophical feel-good exercise for creative types who dislike competition.
Right. It's not just a nice to have. As we navigate deeper into the modern economy, creating new market space is transitioning from a neat strategic option to a strict, unyielding economic imperative.
It's becoming a matter of survival.
It is rapidly becoming a matter of corporate survival.
I'm really glad you brought that up because it is very easy to hear the term blue ocean and just dismiss it as a luxury. A listener might think, well, that sounds lovely for a Silicon Valley tech startup operating out of a garage, but I work in industrial manufacturing or I run a regional logistics firm. My industry is stable, mature, and traditional.
But the underlying mechanics of the global economy are shifting in a way that makes treading water in a red ocean increasingly lethal, regardless of what industry you're in.
Lethal.
Lethal is the correct word. What we are witnessing is the collision of massive, unstoppable macroeconomic forces. The first force is the accelerated pace of technological advancement.
Okay.
Over the last few decades, technology has systematically and drastically improved industrial productivity across almost every sector imaginable. This means suppliers are now capable of producing an unprecedented volume and variety of products and services.
Right, so the marginal cost of producing the next unit, whether it's a car, a microchip, or a software license, has plummeted. We have built an infrastructure that can churn out more stuff faster and cheaper than at any point in human history.
And that leads directly to a massive structural imbalance.
So,
In most developed markets around the world, supply is now vastly exceeding demand.
just too much stuff.
Way too much stuff. The human population simply isn't growing at a rate fast enough to absorb and consume the sheer volume of goods and services being pumped into the market. We have a fundamental oversupply problem.
And when you have too much of a product and not enough buyers, the leverage shifts entirely away from the company and into the hands of the consumer.
Exactly. Furthermore, you have to layer globalization on top of this oversupply. Globalization has effectively erased historical trade barriers.
Right.
Supply chains are deeply interconnected, and crucial information regarding product specifications and global pricing is instantly accessible to anyone with a smartphone.
The whole concept of a local monopoly has just been effectively eradicated. It used to be that if I needed a specialized piece of hardware, or honestly even a basic household good, I was somewhat captive to the supplier in my geographic region. Now, I can source that exact same widget from a highly automated factory halfway across the planet, have it shipped for pennies on the dollar, and I can compare pricing from 50 different international vendors in 30 seconds.
So what is the inevitable consequence of infinite supply meeting global transparency?
A race to the bottom.
It is the rapid, relentless acceleration of commoditization. As companies copy each other's technological advances and match each other's global reach, products and services become virtually indistinguishable to the end consumer.
I experience this constantly as a consumer, and I'm sure you listening do too. Legacy brands are bleeding into one another. They're totally losing their distinct identities.
Give me an example of how you see it.
Okay, a perfect example is the laundry detergent aisle at any major grocery store. Decades ago, you had absolute ride-or-die brand loyalists. There were households that would exclusively use Tide, and they would defend that choice fiercely.
Oh, absolutely.
But today, the manufacturing quality gap has narrowed so significantly that the perceived difference is practically zero. A consumer might still sort of prefer Tide, but if Crest or Arm & Hammer is running a 20% off promotion, that brand loyalty just evaporates instantly. The consumer just grabs whatever is on sale because in their mind, soap is soap.
Soap is soap. The airline industry is another textbook example of brutal commoditization.
Yeah, for sure.
Unless a consumer has the budget to fly private, or they are locked into a highly lucrative corporate loyalty program, the actual brand of the commercial airline they fly is almost entirely irrelevant to them.
They don't care if the logo on the tail fin is red, blue, or silver?
Not at all. They simply go to an online travel aggregator, punch in their destination, and select the cheapest flight that departs at a reasonably convenient hour. The core service moving a human body from point A to point B has been entirely commoditized.
And when the consumer can no longer perceive any meaningful differentiation between your product and your competitor's product, what happens?
Price wars.
Right. The only lever you have left to pull to win their business is the price lever.
Which triggers an endless cycle of these price wars. Companies systematically undercut each other, shaving pennies off their margins just to maintain volume.
Just to keep the lights on.
Yeah, and those price wars systematically destroy profit margins, eliminate the budget for future research and development, and eventually run the weakest players into bankruptcy. That is the ultimate symptom of a bloody red ocean. When you lack differentiation, you are entirely at the mercy of macroeconomic pricing pressures, whether the broader economy is in an upturn or a severe downturn.
So the structural realities of the 21st century essentially dictate that the water in the red ocean is only going to get bloodier.
It is unavoidable.
But logically, abandoning the known market to venture into an entirely unknown blue ocean sounds incredibly risky. It feels reckless, actually. How can we verify that pursuing a blue ocean is actually a sound, mathematically responsible financial bet?
Well, the perception of risk is exactly why the authors of the book didn't just rely on theoretical models. They recognized the need for empirical evidence.
Okay, good. We need the receipts.
So they conducted a massive, comprehensive, decade-long study to quantify the actual real-world financial impact of creating blue oceans. They meticulously analyzed 108 distinct business launches spanning across a wide variety of industries.
108, okay.
And they didn't just look at whether the product was cool or innovative. They tracked the hard economics, the initial investments made, the top-line revenues generated, and crucially, the bottom-line profits secured.
I love when abstract strategy meets hard financial data. So let's dig into the methodology here. What did this 108 company study actually reveal about the risk and reward profile of these launches?
The statistical breakdown was staggering, and it completely inverts how most executives view risk. The researchers found that a massive 86% of the business launches studied were what the industry refers to as line extensions.
Okay, let's define a line extension clearly for the listener. This isn't a brand new invention. This is like an incremental improvement or a minor variation introduced within the boundaries of the existing red ocean market.
Correct. It's the strategic equivalent of playing it safe.
Right.
It is introducing a new cherry flavor to an existing soda line. It is a smartphone manufacturer releasing a model with a processor that is 5% faster than last year's model. It is a consumer goods company adding the words new and improved formula to the exact same bottle of shampoo.
The razor company adding a fifth blade because the competitor just added a fourth blade.
Precisely the dynamic. Now, because these line extensions are relatively safe, well understood by the market, and easy to distribute through existing channels, they represented 86% of all the strategic launches.
Makes sense.
And as you might expect, given their sheer volume, they accounted for a majority of the top-line revenue. Specifically, those 86% of launches generated 62% of the total revenues across the entire study.
Okay, I mean, on the surface, that sounds defensible. If you are a risk-averse board of directors, you see that the bulk of your corporate initiatives are bringing in the bulk of your revenue. You feel like you are doing your job protecting market share.
Right. But top-line revenue is vanity. Bottom-line profit is reality.
Oh, here we go.
Here is the critical paradigm-shifting metric from the study. Those line extensions, representing 86% of the total effort, time, and launches, only accounted for a measly 39% of total profits.
Wow, 39%. That is a terrible ratio.
It is awful.
You are expending 86% of your corporate energy, your R&D budget, your marketing spend, and your executive's cognitive load, and the ultimate reward is only 39% of the total profit pool.
It is an incredibly inefficient use of capital and human resources. Now look at the inverse. Let's look at the remaining 14% of the business launches in the study.
The blue ocean ones.
Yes. These were the initiatives specifically aimed at creating blue oceans. They were not tweaking existing products. They were attempting to create entirely new, uncontested market space. Because they were a small minority of the launches, just 14%, they generated a respectable 38% of total revenues.
Which is already a disproportionate return on revenue.
Right.
14% of the launches driving nearly 40% of the cash flow.
But the profit metric is where the true power of the strategy is completely revealed. That tiny 14% of blue ocean launches generated a massive, overwhelming 61% of the total profits across the entire study.
61% of the profit from 14% of the launches. That completely inverts the standard corporate risk profile.
It shatters it.
Because we're constantly taught that venturing into the unknown, creating a new market from scratch, is the highest risk behavior a business can engage in, viewed as a total gamble. But this data argues the exact opposite. It shows that aggressively investing in the crowded, bloody red ocean is actually where the true financial risk lies, because you are burning immense resources for a shrinking sliver of profit.
The data strips away the illusion of safety in the red ocean. It proves that while incremental improvements might keep the lights on and generate top-line revenue, they are a structurally flawed mechanism for generating meaningful, sustainable profit. The performance benefits of creating clear blue waters are mathematically undeniable.
This presents a massive, deeply practical takeaway for you listening right now. I want you to apply this 86-to-14 ratio to your own professional life, your own department, or your own entrepreneurial projects.
Highly recommend doing that.
Really audit your calendar and your budget. Are you spending 86% of your energy, your financial resources, and your sleepless nights just to make incremental, indistinguishable improvements? Are you fighting tooth and nail in a crowded market for a 39% return just to maintain parity with your rivals? Because the data clearly shows that the real payoff, the asymmetric upside, is found when you step outside the pack entirely.
Achieving that, though, requires a fundamental, often uncomfortable reallocation of where you spend your cognitive and financial capital.
Right, but the data naturally leads to another major conceptual hurdle. If blue oceans generate such a wildly disproportionate share of global profits, and if the financial incentive is so undeniably clear, who's actually creating them? Are there just a handful of magical visionary companies out there that have a monopoly on this strategy? Do you have to be Apple or Amazon or Tesla to reliably execute this?
You have just articulated one of the most pervasive, deeply entrenched myths in modern business culture. It is what we can call the illusion of the perfect company.
The perfect company.
Yeah. For the better part of a century, the academic business literature and the mainstream business press have been obsessed with finding a holy grail. The permanently excellent company that possesses some inherent magical DNA, allowing it to repeatedly create blue oceans and permanently outperform the market.
Right. It's the central premise of almost every book you see in an airport bookstore. The 7 Habits of Highly Visionary Brands, or, How the Great Companies Innovate. We desperately want to believe that if we just copy the HR policies, the morning routines, or the corporate culture of a specific tech giant, we will magically inherit their market dominance.
We want a shortcut, but the authors of Blue Ocean Strategy take direct analytical aim at this myth. They specifically critique 2 of the most famous, highest-selling business Bibles of the late 20th century. In Search of Excellence, published in the 1980s, and Built to Last, published in the 1990s.
Oh man, those aren't just books. They are foundational texts for modern management theory. Entire consulting empires were built on their frameworks.
They were incredibly influential. But the authors of Blue Ocean Strategy urge us to look past the initial hype and examine the actual historical outcomes of the companies profiled in those texts.
Okay, let's look at them.
In Search of Excellence, meticulously identified a roster of what they deemed model companies organizations that supposedly cracked the code on permanent structural brilliance. Yet within a mere 5 years of the book's publication, two-thirds of those supposedly perpetually excellent companies had fallen completely from grace.
Wait, two-thirds failed within 5 years. That implies the methodology used to identify their excellence was fundamentally flawed.
Exactly. Companies heavily praised in the book, like Atari and Data General, didn't just experience a minor dip in earnings, they practically slipped into oblivion. The market shifted, and their supposedly perfect corporate cultures were entirely unable to save them.
Wow. So what happened with Built to Last? Because that book was essentially written as a direct response to the failures of In Search of Excellence. They tried to fix the methodology by studying companies that had survived for many decades, aiming to find the DNA of long-term visionary success.
They did attempt to correct the time frame, but upon closer, rigorous examination, the core illusions still fell apart. The researchers behind Blue Ocean's strategy point out a critical flaw. Much of the success attributed to the internal visionary culture of the companies in Built to Last was actually just a symptom of industry-wide macroeconomic waves.
Interesting.
They fell victim to what psychologists call the halo effect.
Unpack the halo effect in this context for us. How does it skew our understanding of business success?
The halo effect occurs when we look at a highly profitable company and automatically assume that every internal aspect of that company, their management style, their corporate culture, their meeting structure, must be brilliant because the financial output is positive.
So we work backward from the profit to justify the process.
Exactly. Take Hewlett-Packard, a heavily featured company in Built to Last. HP met the book's criteria by outperforming the broader market index over a very long period. Therefore, the authors concluded HP possessed a permanently excellent visionary culture.
But I'm guessing that wasn't the whole story.
Not at all. In reality, while HP did outperform the general stock market, so did the entire computer hardware industry they happened to be operating in.
Oh, I see. So they were just a competent boat floating on a massive, historically unprecedented rising tide of the personal computing boom.
Precisely. What's even more telling is that when you look at HP's performance compared to their direct rivals within that specific hardware industry, they didn't even consistently outperform their peers. Yet because the industry as a whole was exploding, they were assigned the halo of permanent excellence.
So the grand conclusion here is that there is no such thing as a permanently excellent company. The visionary company is just a total myth.
That is what the historical data unequivocally confirms. Just as there are no permanently excellent industries that guarantee endless profit, there are no permanently excellent companies. An organization can execute a brilliant, world-changing strategy in one decade and be completely blind, slow, and wrong-headed in the next.
Wow.
The company itself is just the wrong unit of measurement.
Okay, if the company is the wrong unit of measurement and the industry is the wrong unit of measurement, what are we actually supposed to be studying?
To understand the true roots of high performance and market creation, the appropriate unit of analysis is the strategic move.
The strategic move.
Right.
Okay, let's establish a crystal clear definition of that. What separates a strategic move from just like a general business decision?
A strategic move is defined as the specific set of managerial actions and decisions involved in making a major market-creating business offering. It completely divorces success from the company's overarching culture, the charisma of its CEO, or its historical legacy. It focuses exclusively on a specific, targeted action taken in the marketplace at a specific moment in time.
Can you provide a concrete example of a brilliant strategic move made by a company that wasn't necessarily, permanently excellent?
A perfect historical example is Compaq Computer Corporation.
Okay.
In 2001, Compaq was struggling, was ultimately acquired by HP, and ceased to exist as an independent entity.
Right.
Now, if you view business through the lens of the perfect company, you would label Compaq a failure. You would assume their culture was totally flawed. But that ultimate fate does absolutely nothing to invalidate the utterly brilliant blue ocean strategic move Compaq executed in the early 1990s.
What was the move?
In the early 90s, the server market was a red ocean dominated by incredibly expensive, highly complex mini-computers and mainframes. The majority of mid-sized businesses simply couldn't afford them. Compaq didn't try to build a slightly cheaper mainframe. Instead, they made a specific strategic move. They created the PC server industry. They utilized standard, relatively cheap PC components and engineered them to handle server workloads.
They completely bypassed the mainframe red ocean and created a totally new category that unlocked demand from thousands of mid-tier companies who had previously been priced out of the market entirely.
Exactly. That single strategic move unlocked a multi-billion-dollar uncontested market space. It drove massive, highly profitable growth for Compaq for years. The fact that the company stumbled a decade later doesn't erase the brilliance and profitability of that specific move.
And the research in the book supports this thesis across the board. The authors didn't just study a few tech companies. They analyzed over 150 strategic moves made between 1880 and 2000, spanning more than 30 different industries.
And what they found was that blue oceans were not the exclusive domain of giants. They were created by small garage startups and massive legacy conglomerates. They were created by young, inexperienced managers and seasoned, older executives. They happen in highly attractive tech industries and deeply unsexy, unattractive industrial sectors.
It completely democratizes the concept of innovation.
It really does.
And this is an incredibly liberating realization for you as a listener. You do not need to work for a perfect organization. You don't need a flawless 10-year track record. You don't need a charismatic, Steve Jobs-esque visionary leader. And perhaps most importantly, you don't need to spend years trying to build a utopian corporate culture before you are allowed to innovate.
Exactly.
You simply need to study, design, and execute brilliant, specific strategic moves. It levels the playing field. Your very next move in the market can be a blue ocean move, regardless of what your company's past looks like. It shifts the entire focus from the existential worry of who you are as a company to the highly actionable focus of what you do in the market.
That is the empowering core of the framework. But it naturally leads us to the mechanics.
Right.
If the strategic move is the vehicle that transports a company out of the bloody red ocean, what is the actual engine powering that vehicle? How do you reliably construct a move that generates a blue ocean?
Right. What is the actual formula?
In analyzing those 150 historical strategic moves, the authors discovered a highly consistent underlying pattern. The creators of blue oceans didn't use their competitors as a benchmark. They didn't look left and right to see what everyone else was doing.
Okay.
Instead, they employed a fundamentally different strategic logic. This logic is the cornerstone of the entire book. It is called value innovation.
Value innovation. Now, it's a term that sounds a bit like corporate jargon at first glance.
It does a bit.
Let's strip away the buzzword feel and break down the actual mechanics of it so it's crystal clear.
To truly understand value innovation, you first have to understand the deeply entrenched dogma that it is designed to destroy. The most universally accepted dogma in traditional business strategy, the bedrock of the structuralist red ocean view, is the value cost trade-off.
The age-old adage, you get what you pay for.
Precisely. Conventional economic wisdom, championed by traditional strategy models for decades, dictates that a company must make a definitive choice. You can either create high value at a significantly high cost, think of a luxury sports car or a five-star hotel, or you can create reasonable, acceptable value at a very low cost, like a budget economy car or a massive discount retail store.
So the red ocean mindset insists that you cannot do both. You must choose to be either the premium differentiator or the low-cost leader.
Right. It's conceptualized as a rigid seesaw. If the value you offer to the customer goes up, your underlying costs must inevitably go up to fund it. If you want to drive your costs down, you have to strip away value and offer an inferior product.
But value innovation violently shatters that seesaw.
It rejects the premise entirely. Value innovation dictates that to create a true blue ocean, you must aggressively pursue differentiation A&E low cost simultaneously. It is not an or proposition, it is an and proposition.
Pursuing both high value and low cost at the exact same time. Okay, I want to use a practical analogy here to make sure we are really internalizing how this works mechanically, because it does feel very counterintuitive.
Please do.
Think about the red ocean process of buying a house. Usually, a buyer is trapped in that exact value-cost trade-off. You are forced to trade location for square footage. You can choose a tiny, expensive 500 square foot apartment right in the center of the downtown core. That's high-cost, high-value location.
Right.
Or you can get a massive 3,000 square foot house an hour and a half outside the city. That's low-cost, lower-value location. You're sliding up and down the seesaw. Executing value innovation in real estate wouldn't mean trying to build a slightly cheaper, tiny apartment downtown. Value innovation would be finding a massive 3,000 square foot loft in a forgotten, abandoned industrial neighborhood that happens to feature incredible brick architecture. You buy it for a fraction of the cost.
I see where you're going.
And you realize that your specific target buyer doesn't actually care about the traditional prestige of the downtown zip code. What they actually value is high ceilings, proximity to a specific transit line, and walking distance to independent coffee shops. You broke the trade-off by changing the very definition of what value and location mean.
That is a brilliant translation of the concept. You bypassed the costly factors the traditional market obsesses over and created new factors the market hadn't considered. But I want to introduce a massive word of caution here because this concept is frequently misunderstood.
Oh, really? How so?
Value innovation is a very specific, carefully balanced term with two equal codependent halves, value and innovation.
Oh, so you cannot have one without the other. They have to operate in tandem.
Exactly. Let's look at what happens when they don't. If a company focuses on value without innovation, what are they doing?
Just making things slightly better.
They are just making incremental improvements. They are adding the fifth blade to the razor. It certainly improves the value for the user slightly, but it isn't innovative enough to make the product stand out in a crowded marketplace. It will never create a blue ocean. It just keeps you treading water in the red ocean.
That describes the 86% of line extensions from the study we discussed earlier. Safe, but ultimately unprofitable.
Right. Now look at the opposite extreme. What happens when a company becomes obsessed with innovation without rooting it in buyer value?
You end up inventing a brilliant, highly complex piece of technology that absolutely nobody actually wants to buy or use.
It becomes technology-driven, futuristic, bleeding-edge innovation. We see this constantly in Silicon Valley. A company falls in love with its own engineering. They develop a product that is so advanced, so complex, that it shoots way past what the average buyer is actually ready to accept, understand, or pay for.
They just over-engineer it.
Yeah. The authors use a very vivid metaphor for this. Technology innovators and market pioneers often lay the eggs that other, more strategic companies eventually hatch.
Wow. That is a fantastic, slightly tragic phrase. You spend millions of dollars and years of R&D doing all the agonizingly hard work of inventing the core technology. You lay the egg, but because you didn't anchor it to actual buyer value, you go bankrupt.
And then?
Then a few years later, another company comes along, picks up your egg, figures out how to wrap it in a user-friendly interface at the right price point, and they hatch it and make billions.
It is the story of countless tech pioneers. Value innovation only occurs when you anchor your innovative leap directly to utility, price, and cost. It requires the total alignment of your company's entire system of activities.
So we understand the goal is simultaneous differentiation and low cost. But how does a manager actually pull those two levers at the same time? Mechanically, how do you drive costs down while pushing value up?
You achieve it by fundamentally interrogating the factors your industry competes on. The formula requires two simultaneous motions.
Okay, what's the first?
First, you drive costs down by aggressively eliminating and drastically reducing the specific factors that your industry has historically taken for granted and overinvested in. Every industry has legacy features that cost a fortune to maintain, but no longer provide meaningful value to the buyer. You cut those ruthlessly.
Ruthlessly.
And simultaneously, you drive value up by raising and creating entirely new elements that the industry has never offered. You look across boundaries for inspiration, and here's where the economic magic happens.
It is.
As your uniquely superior value generates a massive spike in sales volume, economies of scale begin to kick in. You are producing more, so your per unit costs drop even further.
The practical takeaway here for you listening is transformative. The next time your board of directors, your investors, or your own internal doubts tell you that you must make a choice between delivering high quality or offering a low price, explicitly reject the premise.
Yes.
Change the questions you are asking. Do not ask, how can we make our current product 10% cheaper to manufacture? That is red ocean thinking.
Entirely.
Instead, ask, what expensive features does our entire industry take for granted that we could eliminate entirely without the core customer caring? And how can we redirect all of those financial savings to fund a massive, unprecedented leap in value in a totally new area?
It requires you to stop benchmarking your competitors and start rigorously questioning the boundaries you are artificially accepting.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of foundational theory. We have explored the geography of the oceans, the economic data, the historical context, and the mechanics of the value-cost trade-off. Let's take all of this high-level strategy and anchor it firmly in the real world.
That's a good idea.
I want to look closely at one of the greatest, most vivid strategic moves in the history of global entertainment. Let's break down the ultimate case study presented in the chapter.
It remains perhaps the single most perfect, comprehensive illustration of value innovation in action.
We are talking about Cirque du Soleil. Now, to appreciate the magnitude of this strategic move, we have to go back to the beginning. Before Cirque du Soleil was a multi-billion-dollar global phenomenon with permanent theaters in Las Vegas, it was founded in 1984 by a man named Guy Laliberté.
Yes.
And Guy was not a traditional Harvard-educated corporate CEO. He was a former street performer. His background was in playing the accordion, walking on stilts, and eating fire.
Which is highly symbolic because what he and his team ultimately did to the legacy circus industry was nothing short of setting it on fire and letting it burn.
So true.
To understand the brilliance of their move, we have to thoroughly examine the macroeconomic and cultural state of the traditional circus industry in the early 1980s. It was the absolute definition of a dying, deeply bloody red ocean.
The industry was bleeding out from multiple wounds simultaneously.
The primary wound was on the demand side. Historically, the traditional circus catered almost exclusively to children. It was a family event centered on kids. But by the 1980s, the tastes of children were rapidly changing. They no longer wanted to go sit in a hot, dusty, smelly canvas tent to watch someone juggle.
They wanted to stay home in the air conditioning and play on their new video game console.
Exactly. The shadow cast by alternative forms of entertainment was massive. The circus wasn't just competing with other circuses, it was competing with urban live theater, televised sporting events, and the explosion of home entertainment. The pie of available attention was shrinking.
And while demand was plummeting, costs were simultaneously skyrocketing, largely due to immense supplier power.
Yes.
Let's break down supplier power in this context because it's a crucial economic concept. Why were the costs out of control?
The traditional circus model relied heavily on star performers. The famous lion tamer, the renowned high wire act, the famous clown. Because the marketing relied on these stars to draw a crowd, the stars held all the leverage.
Oh, I see.
If the star lion tamer threatened to walk across the street to a rival circus, the audience would follow them. Therefore, the star could demand exorbitant, skyrocketing salaries, which squeezed the circus owner's profit margins to practically zero.
So, to summarize the red ocean for a circus in 1984.
Yeah.
Your core audience is abandoning you for video games, your star employees are extorting you for higher wages, and on top of all that, you have a growing public relations nightmare with animal rights groups actively protesting your shows.
That is an objectively terrible industry to operate in.
Horrible. And how did the vast majority of the industry respond to these crises?
They did exactly what entrenched structuralist companies do. They looked at the undisputed industry leader Ringling Bros and Barnum and Bailey, and they blindly benchmarked them.
Just copied them.
The smaller regional circuses simply tried to create scaled-down, slightly cheaper clones of Ringling Bros. They tweaked the existing acts, maybe tried to hire slightly cheaper clowns or run slightly more aggressive local marketing. They were literally fighting for a smaller and smaller slice of a rapidly shrinking pie.
But Guy Laliberté and the founders of Cirque du Soleil did not try to build a slightly better, slightly cheaper Ringling Bros. They didn't even attempt to compete with them on the established arms. They looked at the collapsing landscape and methodically applied value innovation. Let's break down the exact mechanics of their strategic move, starting with the cost side of the equation.
Okay.
How do they aggressively drive costs down?
They systematically analyzed the core factors the circus industry took for granted, and they ruthlessly eliminated them. The most significant and shocking cut they made was eliminating the animal shows entirely.
Which is a profound paradigm shift. If you ask anyone on the street to define a circus, the first things they mention are elephants, lions, and tigers. It was considered the indispensable core of the product.
But from a financial perspective, animals are an absolute nightmare.
I can imagine.
They are incredibly expensive to purchase. They require massive amounts of specialized food, complex housing, heavily specialized medical care, and constant expensive transportation infrastructure. Furthermore, the insurance premiums associated with wild animals are astronomical.
Right.
By eliminating animals, Cirque du Soleil instantly eradicated one of the highest structural cost centers in the entire industry. And as a brilliant byproduct, they simultaneously solved the public relations crisis with the animal rights groups.
A master stroke of cost reduction. What was the next major legacy cost they eliminated?
They completely eliminated the reliance on star performers. They realized a critical insight. The modern audience didn't actually care about the specific name or legacy of the clown or the acrobat.
No one goes to the circus for the specific clown's name.
Exactly. The audience just wanted to experience a sense of awe and amazement. So instead of hiring expensive divas, Cirque hired incredibly talented, highly athletic, but completely unknown gymnasts and street performers. This fundamentally broke the supplier power in the industry. It drastically reduced payroll costs and shifted the leverage back to the company.
Okay, so they have stripped out the animals and the expensive stars. What about the physical infrastructure?
They targeted the three-ring circus model. Traditional circuses prided themselves on having three rings operating simultaneously. But that requires a massive, incredibly expensive tent, a sprawling crew to manage it, and worst of all, it actually degrades the viewer experience because the audience is constantly distracted, unsure of where to look.
We can't even focus.
Right. Cirque eliminated the three rings and went to a single, focused stage. This drastically reduced their logistical overhead and setup times.
Now, let's pause here and look at this from the perspective of a traditional Red Ocean Circus executive in 1984.
This is the fun part.
Right. If you walked into a boardroom and pitched a circus that featured absolutely no animals, no famous stars, and only one ring, they would have laughed you out of the building. They would argue that you had stripped out all the value, leaving a hollow shell of a show.
Because that traditional executive is trapped in the value-cost trade-off. They genuinely believe that if you cut those massive costs, you inevitably destroy the value. But Cirque du Soleil wasn't just cutting costs. They were executing value innovation.
So they reinvested that money.
They took all the financial capital saved by eliminating animals and stars, and they used it to raise and create entirely new, unprecedented elements that the circus industry had never even considered offering. To do this, they looked across the traditional industry boundaries, pulling heavy inspiration from the world of Broadway and urban theater.
This is where the value curve shoots straight up into the blue sky. What specific new elements did they create?
First, they created a cohesive theme and narrative. A traditional circus is just a disjointed series of unrelated acts. A clown, then a juggler, then a lion. Cirque created a subtle, overarching storyline that tied the entire performance together from beginning to end, giving it artistic weight.
Okay, what else?
Second, they created original, hauntingly beautiful, artistic music and modern dance choreography, replacing the blaring, repetitive, traditional circus marches.
Oh yeah, the music of Cirque du Soleil is iconic. It feels more like a symphony or a high-end opera than a circus.
And finally, they fundamentally raised the viewing environment. They got rid of the sawdust floors and the uncomfortable hard wooden bleachers. They introduced comfortable theater-style seating, highly sophisticated dramatic lighting design, and an atmosphere of refined elegance. They LS'd the physical venue from a dusty tent to a magical, high-end theatrical experience.
So when we analyze the ultimate result of this value innovation, eliminating the expensive legacy circus costs while simultaneously creating these sophisticated theatrical elements, who did the product actually appeal to? Because they clearly weren't marketing this to a 5-year-old kid who wants to see an elephant.
That is the genius of the move. They completely bypassed the shrinking, highly contested demographic of children. They targeted a brand new, massive demographic, adults and corporate clients.
Wow.
These were affluent individuals who were accustomed to spending their evenings at the ballet, the opera, or premium Broadway shows.
And what do affluent adults going to the ballet expect to pay? They expect to pay theater prices.
Exactly. By creating this uncontested space, Cirque du Soleil was able to command a price point that was several times higher than the cost of a traditional circus ticket. They offered an unprecedented, highly differentiated entertainment experience, and the market was eagerly willing to pay a massive premium for it. Through this strategic move, they achieved a level of global revenue in less than 20 years that took the legacy leader, Ringling Bros, more than 100 years to attain.
20 years to completely eclipse a century-old monopoly. It is one of the most stunning validations of a business theory in modern history. But I want to ask a philosophical question about Cirque du Soleil, because this is where my traditional categorization instincts kind of short-circuit.
Okay, let's hear it.
When you sit down and look at what Cirque du Soleil actually is, what industry are they in? They have acrobats and contortionists, so are they a circus? But they have a cohesive narrative, original scores and high-end seating, so are they a theater? Are they a Broadway production?
What is deeply fascinating about your struggle to categorize them is that your confusion is the ultimate proof of their strategic success. You are trying to diagnose them using rigid, historical red ocean industry labels.
I am. I'm looking for a neat, clean box to put them in, just like the old SIC census system would.
But the creators of a blue ocean don't accept those boxes. They reconstruct the elements across those historical boundaries. Cirque du Soleil is simultaneously a little bit of a traditional circus, a little bit of urban theater, a touch of ballet, and entirely none of them.
It's just its own thing entirely.
They exist in the newly created space between the alternative industries. They carved out an uncontested market space that, even decades later, doesn't really have a universally agreed upon industry name.
They aren't trying to be the best in their industry. They structure their products so they are the only ones in their industry.
They made the competition completely irrelevant because there is literally no one directly comparable to benchmark them against.
So as we bring this extensive deep dive into Chapter 1 to a close, how do we synthesize all these disparate threads? We've covered the brutal reality of red oceans, the expansive potential of blue oceans, the hard data of the 108 company study, the mechanics of breaking the value-cost trade-off, and the masterclass of Cirque du Soleil. What is the unifying theory here?
If we distill everything down to its absolute essence, the soul of this chapter, and really the soul of the entire strategy, revolves around a fundamental cognitive shift. It is the necessary evolution from a structuralist view of the world to a reconstructionist view.
Let's clearly define those two opposing worldviews so they stick with the listener long after this is over.
The structuralist view is the default setting for most of the corporate world. It is the military mindset we discussed at the beginning.
Right.
It is the deeply held belief that industry structures, market boundaries, and the rules of competition are fixed, unchangeable facts of nature. It is a philosophy of environmental determinism.
So if you are a structuralist, you look out at the bloody red ocean, you sigh, you accept the hand you were dealt, and you dedicate your life to fighting just a little bit harder or operating just a little bit leaner than the rival next to you.
You genuinely believe you are forced to compete within those pre-existing walls.
It's like playing a game of poker where you accept the rules, accept the cards, and just try to bluff your way to a marginal victory.
Conversely, the creator of a blue ocean operates with a reconstructionist view. The reconstructionist realizes a profound truth. Market boundaries and industry structures do not actually exist in nature. They are not physical laws like gravity. They are entirely artificial constructs.
They only exist in the minds of the managers who accept them.
Exactly.
That is such a powerful, almost rebellious thought. The walls surrounding your industry, the rules you think you have to follow, they are all completely imaginary.
They are illusions maintained by consensus. The Reconstructionist firmly believes that because those boundaries were created by human decisions, you have the absolute power to reconstruct them through your own strategic actions.
You do not have to accept the value-cost trade-off.
No. You can look across the boundaries of alternative industries, ruthlessly eliminate the expensive elements that no longer matter, pull in elements that offer a massive leap in value, and literally reconstruct a totally new market space.
You aren't just figuring out how to play the game better. You are designing an entirely new board, writing new rules, and inviting the customer to play a game only you can win.
You shift your entire corporate obsession. You stop looking at the supply side, worrying endlessly about what your competitors are doing, and you fixate entirely on the demand side, worrying only about how to unlock unprecedented value for buyers.
And when you make that cognitive leap, you stop fighting a war over shrinking, heavily contested profits, and you start generating entirely new wealth. You step out of the bloody water and into the clear blue.
That's the goal.
Wow. We have covered a truly massive amount of intellectual ground today. We have thoroughly defined what a blue ocean is. We have examined the macroeconomic and historical forces that make finding one a matter of strict survival. And we have reverse engineered the engine of value innovation that powers this entire framework. The theory is undeniably compelling.
It fundamentally changes how you view market dynamics.
It does. But I know exactly what you, the listener, are likely thinking right now as we wrap up. You're thinking, okay, this theory sounds amazing. The data is solid. I want to build my own blue ocean. I want to be the Cirque du Soleil of my specific field. But how do I actually execute this?
Right. Theory only goes so far.
It is very easy for a pair of hosts to sit here and say, just eliminate this and create that in hindsight.
Yeah.
But when I am staring at a blank whiteboard on a Monday morning with a team looking to me for direction, how do I systematically identify what features to eliminate, reduce, raise, and create without just taking wild guesses and risking the entire future of my business?
That is the ultimate necessary question. A theoretical strategy is utterly useless without a mechanism for execution. If you don't have a reliable framework, you aren't innovating. You are just throwing expensive darts in the dark and hoping one hits.
Exactly. And that is precisely where we are heading next. The answer to creating a blue ocean does not rely on blind luck, and it doesn't require you to be a once-in-a-generation creative genius. The answer lies in utilizing specific, rigorously tested analytical tools and visual frameworks designed to help you methodically map out uncontested market space step by step.
It's all about having the right map.
But to get your hands on those practical tools, you'll have to join us for our next deep dive as we crack open Chapter 2. Until then, I want to leave you with one final forward-looking thought to mull over, circling back to the core realization of today's deep dive. If the boundaries of your industry, the rules of your market, and the limits of your potential are truly just imaginary lines drawn by tired managers of the past, what imaginary line are you letting hold you back today? And what would happen to your career, your business, or your life if you just decided to step across it? Think about it. We'll see you next time on the deep dive.
What if everything you've ever been taught about beating the competition is exactly the thing that's keeping you from succeeding?
It is a pretty wild thought to start with, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because for decades, right, the absolute golden rule of business or entrepreneurship, or honestly even just building your own career, has always been about benchmarking.
Oh, totally.
Right.
Finding the best guy and trying to copy them.
Right. You look at the person or the company right next to you, you look at what they're doing, and you basically just try to do it, a little bit better, or maybe a little bit cheaper or faster. But what if that entire premise is fundamentally flawed?
Well, according to the research, it is. It's totally flawed.
What if striving to be the absolute best in an existing super crowded industry is actually this massive dangerous trap that, almost guarantees you're going to face a slow decline?
It is a trap. And, the failure rates of traditional businesses really reflect that reality. Because when you fight for these tiny fractions of a % of market share in a really established industry, you are basically playing a zero-sum game.
You're just trading the same dollars back and forth.
Exactly. The mission of our deep dive today is to explore the analytical tools, the visual frameworks, and the specific systematic pathways that are used to escape that exact trap.
Yeah.
To create totally uncontested market space.
Which is what we call blue oceans, right?
Yeah, blue oceans. We are going to break down how to completely reconstruct the boundaries of any market. And the reason this matters to you, whether you're, running a huge multinational corporation or just planning your very first startup out of a garage, is because it removes the mystery from innovation.
It makes it less of a guessing game.
Much less. It shifts innovation from being this risky, blind guess or, some mystical art of predicting the future into a highly structured, reliable, step-by-step process for generating massive, profitable growth.
So we're basically moving away from this survival of the fittest, bloody red ocean where everyone is just fighting over the exact same shrinking pool of customers.
Exactly.
But to build a brand new market, we first have to accurately diagnose the one we're currently stuck in, right? Like, we have to map the territory first.
You have to know where you are before you can leave.
Yeah. And the foundational tool of this entire philosophy, the thing that makes it all work, is something called the strategy canvas. So how does this tool actually work mechanically, like if I'm drawing it out?
So the strategy canvas is essentially a visual diagnostic framework. It's a way to see the entire current state of play in an industry on one single page. So picture a standard graph in your head.
Okay, got it. X and Y axis.
Right. On the horizontal axis, the x-axis, you map out all the specific factors that an industry currently competes on and invests in.
Like the features that everyone just assumes are required.
Exactly, the expected norms. And then on the vertical axis, you plot the offering level that buyers actually receive across those factors. So a high score on that vertical axis means a company invests a lot of money and resources into that specific factor.
Then a low score means they invest very little, obviously.
Right. So when you plot all these points for a specific company and you connect the dots, you get what is called a value curve.
Okay, so if you map out a traditional industry, let's say, I don't know, the airline industry or the hotel industry, you usually see a whole bunch of value curves that look virtually identical.
Oh, they almost completely overlap.
Right, because everyone is competing on the exact same factors,
Yeah.
just pushing their little line slightly higher or slightly lower than the other guy.
Yeah, the lines just move together in lockstep.
But the text points out that when you look at the anatomy of a winning, commercially viable blue ocean strategy, the curve looks completely alien compared to the incumbents. Like, it doesn't match at all.
No, it breaks the mold entirely.
And it possesses three very specific complementary qualities. It has focus, it has divergence, and it has a compelling tagline. And the classic example here, which I love, is Southwest Airlines.
The perfect example of this.
So walk us through how their value curve looked when they first decided to disrupt the market.
Well, to really understand Southwest's strategy, you first have to understand what the rest of the airline industry was doing at the time.
Which was basically throwing money at everything.
Pretty much. The legacy carriers were competing on a very specific set of expensive factors. They all offered meals, they all built massive business class lounges in the airports, they offered these complex seating choices, and they operated on really elaborate hub-and-spoke routing systems.
Right, where you have to fly into Atlanta just to get to Florida, even if you started in South Carolina.
Exactly. Every single airline invested heavily in all of those factors because, well, that was simply the definition of what an airline did. You didn't question it.
It was just table stakes.
Right. But Southwest looked at their strategy canvas, and they applied the first quality we talked about, which is extreme focus.
Meaning they just stopped doing what everyone else was doing?
Yes.
Yeah.
They intentionally did not invest in those legacy factors. Instead, they focused entirely on just three things: friendly service, speed, and frequent point-to-point departures.
Okay, let me push back on that for a second, though, because this all sounds great in hindsight, right? Southwest is a massive success. But put yourself in the shoes of an airline executive back in the 70s or 80s.
Would have been terrifying.
Totally.
Yeah.
If you suggest cutting meals and taking away assigned seating, your board of directors is going to look at you like you're insane. They tell you that you are intentionally angering the customer. So how do you survive making a decision that just aggressively ignores all the industry standards?
Well, you survive it because of the underlying mechanics of causality. Let's break down why Southwest made those cuts. Because it wasn't just to be cheap, it was a structural necessity to unlock their focus.
What do you mean by structural necessity?
Well, think about the logistics. If you serve meals on a plane, you need catering trucks.
Right. Those big trucks that lift up to the side of the plane.
Right. And catering trucks take a lot of time to load and unload at the gate. And then, if you have assigned seating, boarding the plane takes, 45 minutes?
Oh, yeah, because everyone is shuffling around looking for row 12, trying to shove their bags in the overhead bins.
Exactly. It's chaos.
Yeah.
And all of that means the plane just sits at the gate for an hour or more between every single flight.
Which means the plane isn't making money.
Right. So, by completely eliminating meals and completely eliminating assigned seating, Southwest could turn a plane around and get it back in the air in 15 minutes.
Oh, wow. So eliminating factor A directly funds and physically allows for factor B.
Precisely. What's fascinating here is that the speed of the turnaround meant a single Southwest Boeing 737 could fly far more routes per day than any competitor's plane.
Because it's spending more hours actually in the sky.
Yes. And that amortizes the massive fixed cost of the aircraft over way more flights, which drastically lowers the cost per ticket.
So the legacy airlines basically let their rivals set their agendas.
Exactly. They were forced into these incredibly costly business models because they were just too scared to drop the expected factors.
Yeah.
But Southwest just ignored the competitors and focused only on the factors that allowed for speed and frequency.
Which leads right into the second quality, which is divergence. Because of that insane focus, Southwest's value curve stands completely apart from the legacy airlines.
It looks nothing like them.
Right. It doesn't look like a slightly cheaper version of a traditional airline. The actual shape of the line on the graph is entirely different. They reduced or eliminated the factors the industry took for granted, and they drastically raised the factors that mattered to this massive group of people who just wanted to get from point A to point B.
Right. They basically targeted people who would otherwise just drive a car.
Yeah. And it's the exact same dynamic we see with Cirque du Soleil in the entertainment space.
Oh, Cirque du Soleil is perhaps the purest example of divergence in the book.
Let's break that one down. Because the traditional circus industry, Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey, all those regional circuses, their value curves were identical too, right?
Totally identical. They all competed on having multiple show arenas, the classic three-ring circus.
Right, with all the chaos happening at once.
Yeah. And they competed on bringing in star performers and clowns, showcasing all these exotic animal acts, and pushing aisle concession sales really hard.
But the industry was dying at the time.
It was in a free fall. Children preferred video games, and animal rights groups were gaining a lot of traction and protesting.
So if you are Cirque du Soleil, you look at that identical failing value curve that every other circus is using, and you just completely diverge from it.
You have to.
They eliminated the animals entirely. They got rid of the star clowns. They dropped down from 3 rings to just one single ring. And they did this to completely change their cost structure, right?
Yeah. Yes, because keeping lions and elephants is a logistical and financial nightmare. I mean, you have to feed them, you have to transport them, you have to insure them. The liability is huge.
So by eliminating them, Cirque freed up massive, massive amounts of capital.
And this is where they introduced completely non-circus factors into their value curve. They borrowed from the world of theater.
Oh, right. So they took the capital they saved from eliminating the animals and the 3-ring setup, and they invested it into an artistic, overarching storyline.
Exactly. They commissioned sophisticated original music. They created a highly refined watching environment. So they moved from these dusty, smelly tents to these really elegant, comfortable setups.
So their curve diverged completely from the circus industry and essentially pulled in elements of Broadway.
Yes, which allowed them to charge Broadway prices too.
Which is brilliant. And because both of these companies, Southwest and Cirque, had such focused and divergent strategies, they achieved the third quality of a blue ocean strategy, which is having a compelling tagline.
Right, because a good strategy has to be easy to communicate.
Exactly. It can be communicated clearly and authentically without needing like a 5-page manual. Think about Southwest. Their offering was so clear that their tagline was just, the speed of a plane at the price of a car whenever you need it.
It's perfect. It tells you exactly what they are and exactly what they aren't.
It is brilliant. You know, I like to think of the strategy canvas like a massive audio mixing board in a recording studio.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Yeah. You have all these sliders on the board representing the different factors an industry competes on. And if you push every single slider up to the max, you don't get a musical masterpiece. You just get this expensive, deafening noise.
The static. Yeah.
Right. That is a red ocean. A blue ocean is having the courage to intentionally pull some of those sliders completely down to zero, carving out the sonic space so that the new, unique sounds can actually be heard.
The audio mixing board is an excellent way to visualize it, because you simply cannot diffuse your efforts across every single competitive factor and expect to create a breakthrough.
You'll just go bankrupt.
Exactly. Strategy is as much about what you decide not to do as it is about what you actually decide to do. You have to actively choose what to ignore to create that clear, resonant frequency you're talking about.
Okay, so if we have our mixing board, right, and a company's leadership team has adjusted their sliders, what happens when we step back and look at the final sound wave? Like, what does the resulting value curve actually tell us about the underlying health of a business?
Well, the value curve is incredibly revealing. It acts almost like a diagnostic polygraph test for a company's executive team.
A polygraph. Because they might be lying.
Well, they might stand up in a boardroom and claim they're innovating. You know, they might have the word disruption plastered on the office walls and neon lights. But the curve contains a wealth of objective strategic knowledge. The math doesn't lie.
Right.
There are 5 main diagnostic signs you can read from a company's value curve that essentially tell you their future just by diagnosing their present.
Okay, let's walk through those. What is the very first sign?
The first is seeing if a company is fundamentally caught in the red ocean. So you map the canvas, and you see that the company's value curve converges entirely with its competitors.
The lines just move in lockstep.
Exactly. If the competitor's line goes up on price, theirs goes up. If the competitor goes up on features, theirs goes up. This signals that the company is stuck.
They're just following the leader.
Right. Their growth will be slow, their margins are going to be incredibly thin, and honestly, their survival is entirely dependent on the overall luck of the macroeconomic industry growing, not on their own strategic merit.
So what does this all mean? It means they're just a Me Too business fighting for inches.
Yes.
Okay, what is the second warning sign?
The second sign is over-delivery without payback. This happens when you look at the canvas and you see a company delivering extremely high levels across absolutely all the factors.
So they're pushing every single slider to the max.
Exactly. But when you look at their market share and their profitability, the math just doesn't reflect those massive investments.
Like, they aren't dominating the market even though they offer the most.
Right. It means they are oversupplying their customers with elements that add a ton of incremental cost to the business, but no real value to the buyer. The buyer doesn't care. So they desperately need to exercise that first quality we talked about, focus, and decide which factors to brutally eliminate and reduce.
I see this in tech hardware all the time, honestly. Like, a smartphone company will spend a fortune to have the absolute best camera, the best battery, the highest resolution screen, and the most premium materials.
And they charge a fortune for it.
Yeah, but the customer doesn't actually care enough to pay a 40% premium just so their photos are 5% sharper. They're just burning cash to win a spec sheet war that only nerds on Reddit care about.
That is a perfect example of over-delivery. And the third sign is what the framework calls an incoherent strategy. It's often visually referred to as a bowl of spaghetti.
A bowl of spaghetti.
Yeah, because when you look at the value curve, it just zigzags wildly. Low on one factor, high on the next, then low, low, high, low. There is no rhythm or reason to it, no overarching narrative.
But why does that happen? Because nobody intentionally sets out to build a bowl of spaghetti, right? No CEO says, let's make a confusing product.
No, of course not.
Hmm.
It usually happens because an organization is built on deeply entrenched functional silos.
Oh, like the departments aren't talking to each other.
Exactly. So the marketing department pushes really hard for one specific feature because it tested well in their focus groups. But then the engineering department demands another feature because it's technologically impressive and they want to show off.
And then let me guess, the finance department steps in and slashes costs on a third feature to meet some quarterly budget.
You nailed it. Individually, those sub-strategies might make logical sense to those specific departments, but collectively, they do absolutely nothing to distinguish the company in the broader market. It's a camel, a horse designed by a committee.
That makes total sense. The math doesn't lie. If your curve is a bowl of spaghetti, it means your internal corporate politics are dictating your product, not a cohesive vision.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what is the fourth diagnostic sign?
Strategic contradictions. This is when a company offers a very high level on one competitive factor, but completely ignores the supporting factors required to actually make it work.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. For example, a company might invest millions of dollars into making their e-commerce website incredibly easy to navigate. It has a beautiful, intuitive design, amazing graphics, all of that. But they completely ignore the back-end server infrastructure.
Oh no, so the site just barely loads.
Exactly. The site operates incredibly slowly. You're giving the customer a massive benefit with one hand, a beautiful design, and immediately taking it away with the other hand because it takes 5 minutes to check out.
That is honestly the most frustrating consumer experience. Yeah. You have this gorgeous interface, but you're just staring at a loading wheel for 2 minutes. The slow speed completely negates the massive investment in the design. The customer leaves just as angry as if the site was incredibly ugly in the first place.
And they probably won't come back.
No, never. Okay, and the fifth sign.
The fifth and final diagnostic sign is determining whether a company is internally driven or externally driven. And you can tell this simply by looking at how they label the factors on the horizontal axis of their own strategy canvas.
Just from the labels?
Yes. Do they use deep operational jargon? Like, do they label a factor megahertz or thermodynamic efficiency? Or do they use terms that buyers actually understand and value, like speed or quiet operation?
Oh, wow. That is such a subtle but powerful tell. It's the curse of knowledge, right?
Exactly. If your canvas is full of engineering jargon, it means the company is looking at the market from an inside-out operational perspective. You don't even speak the language of your own customer, so how could you possibly expect to offer them a massive leap in value?
You can't. So the practical takeaway for you listening right now is to actually map your own business or your own project on a strategy canvas. And you have to be brutally honest with yourself. If your curve mimics your biggest rival, or if it looks like a bowl of spaghetti, or if your factors are named after complex internal metrics that nobody outside your company understands, you have a major structural problem that you need to fix.
Yes. Diagnosing the problem is step one. It's this vital visual awakening.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the next logical question is, how do we actually break out of these converging curves?
Right. Once we see the red ocean, how do we escape it?
Right. If we know we are in a red ocean, how do we systematically reconstruct the market boundaries to find a blue one? The framework provides a systematic approach called the 6 paths, and we're going to look at the first 3 today.
Let's start with path 1. Looking across alternative industries. I find this path really fascinating because it forces us to challenge our basic assumptions about who our actual competitors even are. We tend to get such tunnel vision.
We really do. In the broadest sense, a company rarely just competes with the other firms in its own specific industry. It also competes with companies in completely different industries that produce alternative products or services. And there is a critical distinction we must make here between substitutes and alternatives.
Okay, let's define those clearly because I think people mix them up.
Substitutes are products or services that have different forms, but offer the exact same core function.
Like what?
Take a physical plastic desktop calculator and a software calculator app on your phone.
Oh, okay.
They look totally different, their form is entirely different, but they perform the exact same mathematical function. They substitute each other. Alternatives, on the other hand, include products or services that have entirely different functions and different forms, but they serve the exact same overarching objective for the buyer.
Okay, let's ground that with the NetJets example from the text because I think that makes it super clear. They created a multi-billion-dollar blue ocean in the concept of fractional jet ownership.
Right.
Before NetJets, if a massive corporation needed to move their executives around the country, they essentially looked at two alternatives that served the overarching objective of corporate travel. Alternative 1 was commercial first-class flight. Alternative 2 was buying a private jet outright.
So let's look at the severe pain points of both of those alternatives.
Yeah.
Because if a company chose the alternative of buying a private jet, the upfront capital costs were astronomical. We're talking tens of millions of dollars.
Right. You're buying a plane.
Plus, they had to manage the asset themselves. They had to pay for ongoing maintenance, they had to secure hangar space at the airport, and they had to hire full-time pilots. And most punishing of all, they suffered massive deadhead costs.
Okay, so a deadhead flight is when the plane has to fly completely empty just to get to the location where the executive is actually waiting.
Right. Yes, exactly. So you are burning thousands and thousands of dollars an hour in jet fuel and pilot time, and the plane is completely empty.
That's a huge waste of money.
Huge. But if the corporation chose the other alternative, commercial first class, they avoided those massive upfront asset costs and maintenance headaches.
Because they're just buying a ticket.
Right. However, they suffered a completely different set of pain points. They had long check-in times, constant flight delays, highly inflexible schedules dictated by the airline, and just the sheer exhausting hassle of navigating major airports.
Right. Taking your shoes off at security, waiting at the gate, all of it.
Exactly. So NetJets looked across these two alternative industries. They didn't ask the red ocean question.
Which would be, how do we make a slightly better first-class seat? Or how do we manufacture a private jet slightly cheaper?
Right, they didn't ask that. Instead, they asked, why do buyers choose one alternative over the other? They realized that people bought private jets for the incredible speed, the privacy, and the point-to-point convenience. And people flew commercial solely to avoid massive upfront asset costs and maintenance liabilities.
So NetJets offered the speed and convenience of a private jet, but by selling fractional ownership, where a company might buy, say, 1/16 of an aircraft, they offered it at the cost of commercial airline tickets.
Exactly. And they completely eliminated the deadhead costs and the management hassles because NetJets handled all the fleet logistics themselves. They pulled the most attractive factors from both alternatives and created a totally uncontested market space.
It's so smart.
Another exceptional example of Path 1 is the Japanese telecom company NTT Docomo, with their creation of iMode back in 1999. They look at two distinct alternatives for accessing information and communicating: the internet and mobile cell phones.
We really have to set the technological context here for 1999 for this to make sense. At the time, the internet offered endless information, right? But it was physically tied to a heavy desktop computer sitting in your office or your den.
Right. You couldn't take it with you.
And dial-up connections were painfully slow, and the sheer volume of data was honestly just overwhelming to navigate for an average person. Cell phones, on the other hand, offered total mobility and basic voice communication, but virtually zero data capability. Like, you couldn't look anything up.
Well, there had been early attempts to combine them, notably something called WAP Wireless Application Protocol. But it was a massive, massive failure.
Why did WAP fail so badly?
Because telecom companies were essentially trying to force the entire data-heavy desktop internet through a tiny, incredibly slow mobile pipeline onto a 2-inch black and white screen. It was physically slow to load and psychologically frustrating for the user. It was the worst of both worlds.
So NTT Docomo didn't just try to build a slightly better WAP browser. They asked why people use the internet in the first place. They realized people didn't actually want the whole internet on their phone. They wanted specific, actionable information, like news headlines, weather updates, train schedules, and just basic email.
And why did they use cell phones?
No.
Because of the mobility. So iMode combined the mobility of a phone with a highly focused, curated data service. They reconstructed the market by looking across the boundaries of the desktop internet industry and the telecom industry.
They stripped away the overload and kept only the essential factors.
Yes.
I want to pause here for a second because there is a profound psychological disconnect we really need to highlight. Why do we naturally abandon our common sense the exact second we become sellers?
What do you mean?
Think about it. As consumers, you and I weigh alternatives across entirely different industries every single day, naturally. If you need to do your taxes, you evaluate buying a software program like TurboTax, hiring a human CPA, or literally just using a pencil and a piece of paper.
Right, you just look for the best way to get it done.
Exactly. You are weighing a software industry, a service industry, and an office supply industry to solve one single objective. But the second we become business owners or executives, we put on blinders. We only look at the other software companies, or we only look at the other CPAs in our town.
It is a profound cognitive trap. We become so obsessed with beating our direct, obvious rival that we totally forget to look at how the customer is actually solving their problem in the real world.
So the practical takeaway here is to stop asking how to beat the rival in your specific industry.
Stop benchmarking.
Right. Instead, ask yourself why your buyers choose to trade across alternative industries. Find the factors that pull them toward those alternatives, steal the best elements from both sides, and aggressively eliminate the rest.
Well said.
So path one requires us to look outside our industry entirely. But what if the opportunity is hiding closer to home? What if the blue ocean is right between the distinct groups within your own industry?
That is exactly what Path 2 addresses, trading up and down by looking across strategic groups.
Okay, what is a strategic group?
A strategic group is simply a cluster of companies within an industry that are pursuing a very similar strategy. In almost every established industry, you can rank players into a rough hierarchical order based on two main dimensions: price and performance.
So like good, better, best.
Basically, you have the high-end luxury group, the mid-tier group, and the economy group.
And traditionally, companies only pay attention to the other players within their specific strategic group, right? Like Mercedes meticulously watches BMW and Audi. They don't really care what Hyundai or Kia is doing.
Correct. But here's where it gets really interesting. When you stop looking only at your immediate peers and start analyzing why customers trade up to a higher strategic group or why they trade down to a lower one, you uncover massive opportunities.
Let's look at Curves, the women's fitness franchise, because they revolutionized the fitness industry by doing exactly this, analyzing two distinct strategic groups.
Right. The fitness industry was very segmented.
Yeah. First, you have the traditional health clubs. These were expensive, they required locking into annual contracts, they were heavily focused on men and bodybuilding, and they were full of amenities like juice bars, saunas, and swimming pools.
Amenities that, frankly, the vast majority of members never even used, but still had to pay for in their monthly fees. Plus, for a lot of women, those traditional gyms were incredibly intimidating environments.
Oh, absolutely. Having a bunch of buff guys grunting in the mirror while you're trying to figure out a treadmill is not a great experience.
Right. On the other end of the spectrum, the other strategic group was home exercise programs, specifically workout videos like the Jane Fonda tapes.
Which were incredibly cheap, and they offered total privacy in your living room.
True. But they had a massive failure rate. They completely lacked motivation. It was really easy to get distracted by the phone ringing or the TV. And as a result, it was incredibly easy to just quit.
So Curves looked at these two groups. They asked, why do women trade up to health clubs and why do they trade down to home videos?
And what did they find?
They realized women wanted the privacy and the low cost of the home videos, but they desperately needed the external motivation and the structured equipment of a health club.
So Curves executed a flawless blue ocean move. They eliminated all the expensive, intimidating factors of the traditional gym. They got rid of the floor-to-ceiling mirrors entirely. They banned men.
Which changed the vibe completely.
Yes. And they completely eliminated the juice bars, the locker rooms, and the complex, heavy machinery. Instead, they created a non-threatening, highly supportive atmosphere.
And their equipment setup was totally different too, right?
Yes. They arranged simple hydraulic exercise machines in a circle. Hydraulic machines are brilliant because they don't require adjusting heavy weight pins, which can be confusing or intimidating. They just adapt to the user's force, making them safe and fast to use.
And because the machines were in a circle, women could chat and support each other while they worked out.
Exactly. And a full-circuit workout took exactly 30 minutes. It was perfectly tailored for busy women who wanted to get in, get healthy, and get out without feeling judged.
And let's look at the business model side of that for a second. Because they eliminated the pools, the saunas, and all that heavy equipment, the actual physical footprint of a Curves gym was tiny compared to a Gold's gym.
Right, you could put one in a strip mall.
Exactly. That meant the capital required to open a franchise was incredibly low. The result was staggering growth. They acquired over 2 million members and opened thousands of centers worldwide. They didn't compete with Gold's Gym, and they didn't compete with workout tapes. They created something entirely new by borrowing from both.
We see this pattern constantly across different sectors, not just fitness. Ralph Lauren created a blue ocean by looking across the strategic groups of haute couture, high fashion, and classic functional lines like Brooks Brothers.
So they merged them.
Yeah, they combined the designer name, the elegant store atmosphere, and the luxury materials of haute couture with the updated classical look and the more accessible pricing of Brooks Brothers. Or look at Lexus in the automotive industry. Toyota created Lexus by looking at the high-end luxury group of Mercedes and BMW, and the lower-end luxury group of Cadillac and Lincoln.
So they offered the high-quality engineering of a Mercedes at a price point much closer to a Cadillac.
Exactly. This raises an important question for anyone listening to this deep dive right now. What are the distinct strategic groups in your field? If you map out your industry on a graph of price versus performance, what do those clusters actually look like?
Right.
And more importantly, why do your customers choose to trade up to the higher, more expensive group, and why do they trade down to the cheaper group?
So the practical takeaway here is that you don't have to choose between being a premium brand or a discount brand. The magic happens when you extract the most attractive, highly valued factors of the high-end group, combine them with the most attractive factors of the low-end group, and completely eliminate everything else in the middle that people don't actually care about. You break the fundamental value-cost trade-off.
Precisely. You don't compromise, you eliminate the waste.
Okay, so we've looked at alternative industries and we've looked at strategic groups, but up until this point, our entire conversation has been operating on a fairly massive assumption. We have been assuming that an industry actually knows who the customer is.
Right, the person holding the credit card.
Exactly. We assume that the person handing over the cash is the only person whose opinion matters. But what if we have been targeting the wrong person the entire time?
That brings us to path 3. Shifting the target by looking across the chain of buyers. In almost every established industry, competitors naturally converge around a single shared definition of who the target buyer is.
But that's usually an illusion, right?
It is. In reality, the buyer is rarely just one person. It is almost always a chain of people involved directly or indirectly in the decision. You have the purchasers, the people who actually authorize the payment. You have the users, the people who actually interact with the product or service on a daily basis. And you have the influencers, the people whose professional opinions dictate or strongly guide the final choice.
And the critical insight here is that those three groups often have radically different definitions of what constitutes value. If an industry focuses exclusively on one link in that chain, it leaves massive value locked up in the other links.
Let's look at Novo Nordisk to explain this. They're a Danish pharmaceutical company that produces insulin. For decades, the entire global insulin industry focused completely on the influencers, the doctors.
Which, I mean, makes logical sense at first glance, right? Because doctors are the ones actually writing the prescriptions. If you win the doctor over, you win the sale.
It was the accepted conventional logic. And because they focused exclusively on doctors, the entire industry competed on one primary metric, the medical purity of the insulin.
Because doctors are scientists.
Right.
Yeah.
Doctors are scientists. They cared about scientific efficacy and purity. But Novo Nordisk realized that while the doctor was the influencer, the patient was the actual user. And the user had a completely different set of daily pain points that had nothing to do with medical purity.
We have to imagine the daily life of a diabetic in the 1980s. Purity wasn't their primary daily struggle. Their daily struggle was the stigma, the physical pain, and the massive inconvenience of having to carry around fragile glass vials of insulin and separate, intimidating medical syringes to inject themselves multiple times a day.
It was a huge, visible quality of life issue. Going to a restaurant and having to deal with the vials and syringes in a public restroom, it was awful.
But the industry was completely blind to it because they were only talking to doctors and laboratories.
Exactly. So Novo Nordisk executed path 3. They shifted their target.
Right.
They bypassed the doctor's definition of value and focused entirely on the user's problem. They created the Novo Pen. It was a device that looked exactly like a high-end fountain pen, but it contained an insulin cartridge and a simple click mechanism for dosing.
That is a brilliant cognitive shift.
Yeah.
It completely removed the medical stigma because it just looked like an office supply, not terrifying medical equipment. It was easy to carry in a pocket, and it was far less painful and intimidating to use in public.
By shifting their focus from the influencer to the user, they solved the human problem, not just the clinical problem, and they came to completely dominate the global insulin industry.
Another incredible example of Path 3 is Bloomberg in the financial information industry. Back in the early 1980s, who were the primary buyers and users of financial data feeds?
Well, the purchasers were the corporate IT managers at massive Wall Street firms. They held the budget, and their metric for value was cost and standardization. They just wanted the cheapest, easiest to maintain plumbing to get the stock data into the building.
But the users, the actual traders and financial analysts on the floor, had a totally different reality. They were the ones making split-second decisions that made or lost millions of dollars. For them, the standard data feeds were terrible.
They were just streams of numbers.
Right, they had to use pencils and handheld calculators to figure out fair market values based on the raw data coming in. It was slow, it was chaotic, and it was prone to catastrophic errors.
So Michael Bloomberg saw this massive disconnect in the buyer chain. He realized the industry was successfully serving the IT manager but fundamentally failing the trader. He shifted his focus entirely to the users. He designed the Bloomberg terminal specifically to offer traders unprecedented value.
And the physical design was radically different.
Oh, completely. He built systems with dual-screen monitors so they wouldn't have to constantly open and close multiple windows. He created customized keyboards where the keys were color-coded and labeled with familiar financial jargon instead of standard QWERTY computer keys.
But wait, let me test that logic, though. If the IT manager holds the budget and their priority is low cost and standardization, why build a highly expensive, non-standard, customized terminal for a trader who doesn't even have the authority to actually sign the purchase order? How does that actually result in a sale?
Because Bloomberg realized that if he made the traders deeply dependent on his tool, they would revolt if anyone tried to take it away. He built all the analytical capabilities right into the system. A trader could hit one button and run what-if scenarios that used to take them 5 minutes with a calculator.
Oh, so they became faster and made more money.
Exactly. But he didn't stop at just financial tools. He realized these traders worked insane hours. They had immense disposable income, but virtually zero free time. So he added functions to the terminal where traders could buy flowers for their spouses, book travel, or look up real estate during lulls in the market.
He made the terminal indispensable to their entire life, not just their job.
Yeah.
So the strategy was leverage. The traders loved the Bloomberg terminals so much that they wielded their internal power to basically force the IT managers to buy them. Bloomberg bypassed the traditional buyer and used the end user's demand to pull the purchaser along.
That's it, exactly.
It reminds me of the pet food industry. We often use this analogy. The dog is obviously the user, but the human is the purchaser. If the entire industry is solely focused on making the bag look visually appealing to the human-like, putting pictures of fresh vegetables and prime cuts of steak on the cardboard, they are missing the point. If you formulate the food so it is incredibly, undeniably irresistible to the dog, the human has absolutely no choice but to keep buying it.
I see where you're going with the visual, but let me push back on that analogy slightly. You can't ignore the purchaser entirely.
Okay, why not?
Because if the bag looks terrible, or if the ingredients look dangerous to the human never buys it the first time for the dog to even try.
Fair point.
Blue Ocean strategy, especially Path 3, isn't about entirely abandoning the purchaser. It is about shifting the primary value proposition to the neglected user so that their overwhelming demand pulls the purchaser along. The IT managers still got a system that was reliable, even if it cost more.
That is a critical distinction. It's a reweighting of priorities, not total abandonment. So the practical takeaway for our listeners here is to meticulously map out the chain of buyers in your specific industry. Who pays, who uses, who influences.
Right, map all of them.
Usually, the entire industry is hyper-focused on just one of those groups. If you can identify the neglected links in that chain and shift your value proposition to solve their specific, ignored pain points, you can unlock entirely new avenues of demand.
Let's synthesize everything we've covered today, because we've gone through a lot. The soul of this deep dive is a fundamental realization about the nature of innovation itself. True innovation is not some mystical art. It's not about predicting the future with a crystal ball, and it's certainly not about just adding more and more features to beat your competitor in a spec sheet war.
No, we saw how that leads to the bowl of spaghetti.
Exactly. It is a systematic, visual process of cognitive reconstruction.
By utilizing these analytical tools, like actually plotting your current reality on the strategy canvas, and by deliberately looking outside the conventional boundaries at alternatives, at different strategic groups, and at neglected links in the buyer chain, you can systematically break the value cost trade-off. And you don't have to choose between being better or being cheaper. By focusing and diverging, you can be both, and in doing so, you make your competitors completely irrelevant.
You rewrite the rules of the game so that you are the only one playing.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. I hope you're walking away looking at your own industry and your own assumptions with completely fresh eyes. Now that we know how to systematically reconstruct the boundaries of an industry, next time we're going to explore how to ensure you aren't just creating a new market, but actually capturing the absolute largest mass of buyers possible within it. We are going to talk about reaching beyond existing demand.
Before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We have spent this entire session applying the strategy canvas and the 6 paths framework to businesses and corporate strategies. But consider applying this exact same diagnostic tool to your own career or your personal brand.
Oh, wow. Map your own skills.
Yes. If you map out your personal skills and attributes and your value curve looks exactly like every other person in your field, you are swimming in a personal red ocean. You are a commodity. So what industry standard, what expected norm in your profession can you completely eliminate today in order to free up the time and energy to fund the creation of a unique skill that absolutely no one else in your field possesses? Find your personal blue ocean. So picture this. It's 1995. And if you wanted to open a successful fitness center back then, literally every single piece of industry data, every highly paid consultant, and, every trade magazine told you to do the exact same things.
Oh, yeah. The blueprint was basically set in stone.
Right. You needed to buy more wall-to-wall mirrors. You needed heavier free weights. You absolutely had to install a juice bar. And you probably needed a pool if you really wanted to compete.
Because that's what a gym was. That was the accepted definition.
Exactly. So one company comes along, they look at all of that established concrete wisdom, and they decide to do the exact opposite.
Which is just, it's completely crazy at the time.
Totally. They stripped out the mirrors. They explicitly banned men from joining. They got rid of the locker rooms entirely. No showers, no pool. And by deliberately ignoring everything that made a gym a quote-unquote gym, they became the fastest-growing fitness franchise in world history.
It is such a brilliant contradiction. I love that story.
Today, we're figuring out how they did it. And more importantly, how you, the listener, can do it too.
Because when we look at how businesses operate today, whether it's, a massive tech conglomerate or just a local bakery down the street, so many of them are completely paralyzed by what strategists call search risk.
Search risk.
Yeah. They have this profound, almost existential fear of leaving the safety of their known established market.
It's scary. It makes sense.
It does. The idea of finding a completely new customer base, it feels like being a riverboat gambler. They assume it requires betting the entire company's future on like a wild hunch or some rare stroke of visionary genius.
Like you have to be Steve Jobs to do it.
Exactly. But the reality is that creating a massive new market, it really doesn't have to be a guessing game at all.
And that right there is the core tension we are unpacking today.
Okay.
We are taking a deep dive into Chapter 3 of the incredibly influential book, Blue Ocean Strategy. The chapter is titled Reconstruct Market Boundaries.
It's arguably the most practical part of the whole framework.
I think so too. Over the next hour or so, you're going to learn a highly systematic framework to break out of the accepted conventional walls of your industry.
And we're going to walk through 6 specific lenses or paths that you can use to find uncontested market space.
Right, what the authors call a blue ocean, as opposed to a bloody red ocean,
Right.
where, everyone is just fighting to the death over the same shrinking pool of customers.
It's exhausting, and this matters profoundly for anyone interested in business or entrepreneurship, or frankly, just human psychology.
Because it proves that you don't need psychic foresight to innovate. Right? You just need to look at the exact same data your competitors have, but methodically challenge the assumptions that they're just, too terrified to question.
That's a perfect framing. To get to that blue ocean, we first have to start recognizing the invisible walls we've built around our own thinking.
The boundaries.
Right. And the thickest wall of all is almost always how we define the industry itself. We get so locked into our specific vertical that we develop absolute tunnel vision.
Let's start right there then. Path number 1. Because before we can even begin to tear down those walls, We really have to understand a crucial distinction the authors make about how customers actually make purchasing decisions.
The substitute versus alternative debate.
Yes. They talk a lot about the difference between a substitute and an alternative. Now, if you're just talking to a friend, those words are used completely interchangeably. But here, the difference is basically the whole ballgame.
It fundamentally changes how you view your competition. So a substitute is a product or service that has a different physical form, but it performs the exact same function.
Like what? Give me an example.
So if you are an accountant and you need to calculate taxes, you could use a sophisticated software program, or you could use a physical ledger and a calculator.
Okay, right.
The form is different, digital versus physical, but they serve the exact same function. You are swapping one out for the other to execute the identical task.
So if I'm selling tax software, I'm constantly sweating over the ledger company. I'm trying to make my software slightly faster or, slightly cheaper to beat the substitute.
Yes. And that mindset keeps you trapped in the red ocean. You're just competing on features.
Yeah.
An alternative, on the other hand, goes much, much wider.
How so?
Alternatives include products or services that have different forms, perform entirely different functions, but serve the exact same overarching objective.
The analogy in the text that completely clicked for me on this was the restaurant versus the movie theater.
Oh, that's a great one.
Right. If you look at them on paper, they are not substitutes at all. A restaurant provides food, ambiance, a space for conversation. The function is gastronomy and socialization.
And a cinema gives you visual entertainment in a dark room where you are explicitly told not to talk. The function is purely visual storytelling.
Exactly. But think about a couple trying to decide what to do on a Friday night. They're weighing these two completely different experiences against each other. Why? Because they serve the exact same objective, enjoying a night out together.
Think about the psychology of that for a second. As consumers, we make these alternative calculations intuitively, effortlessly, every single day.
All the time.
You sit on your couch after a long week and think, do I want to go out to a nice Italian dinner, or do I want to catch the new blockbuster movie, or I don't know, maybe I'll just book a massage.
You're just trying to relax.
Right. You're weighing alternative industries without even thinking about it. But the second we put on our business hats and become sellers, we lose that intuition entirely. We only look at our direct competitors.
I see this constantly. The local movie theater manager is obsessing over the fact that the other movie theater across town just put in, heated reclining seats.
They're panicking over the seat.
Exactly. They're tearing their hair out, figuring out how to afford new seats, completely blind to the fact that their actual biggest threat that night is the new tapas restaurant that just opened down the street.
Because trade journals, trade shows, industry analysts, they all constantly reinforce these vertical walls. The cinema manager goes to a cinema convention.
The restaurateur goes to a hospitality convention.
Yep. They never talk to each other. But the space between those alternative industries is an absolute goldmine for value innovation. If you can understand why customers trade across those alternatives, you can build something entirely new.
Let's look at a massive historical success story that capitalized on this exact blind spot. NetJets.
Oh, classic.
They created the blue ocean of fractional jet ownership. And they didn't do it by looking at what other private jet manufacturers were doing. They looked at the alternatives for their highly specific target customer, the corporate executive.
To understand the genius of NetJets, you really have to understand the excruciating pain points of the corporate traveler in the 1980s and 90s.
It was not fun.
No. If you were a CEO or a top-tier executive needing to fly across country, you traditionally had two main alternatives. You could fly commercial, specifically first class or business class. Or your corporation could buy a private jet outright.
Let's analyze the commercial airline alternative first. Why did companies choose it?
Mostly because it avoided massive upfront capital. It's relatively cheap compared to buying an airplane, and it's a variable cost.
Right. You only pay for the travel you actually use. If your executives don't fly 1 month, you don't pay.
Exactly. But the friction involved is unbelievable. You have to mold your entire corporate schedule to the airline's schedule. You have to travel to a major hub airport, which is crowded and often far from your actual destination.
And you deal with check-in lines, security theater, flight delays, missed connections, and crucially for executives, you can't really discuss highly confidential mergers or acquisitions.
Because the person drinking a gin and tonic in the seat next to you might be a competitor? Or a journalist?
It's inflexible, stressful, and highly inefficient for someone whose time is literally worth thousands of dollars an hour.
So what about the other alternative? Corporate ownership of a private jet. The appeal there is obvious.
Oh, unmatched speed, ultimate convenience, total privacy, and true point-to-point travel. You tell the pilot when you want to leave.
You can land at thousands of smaller regional airports that commercial airlines don't even serve, getting you 5 minutes away from your actual meeting instead of 2 hours away.
But the pain points,
Mm.
the math is just brutal. The upfront capital investment is astronomical, tens of millions of dollars, just to acquire the physical asset.
And it doesn't stop there. Then you are saddled with massive fixed costs. You have to put pilots on full-time salary. You have to pay for hangar space, insurance, and highly specialized maintenance.
And the absolute worst part is what the industry calls deadhead costs.
Let's unpack the deadhead cost because it is a critical inefficiency. A deadhead flight is when the plane has to fly completely empty from one location to another just to be in the right place to pick you up.
So if your executives fly from New York to Los Angeles and stay for a week,
That plane either has to sit on the tarmac in LA racking up parking fees, or it has to fly empty all the way back to New York to serve someone else in the company.
you are literally paying thousands of dollars an hour to fly an empty metal tube across the country.
It's an enormous waste of resources. So NetJets looked at these two distinct alternatives. They didn't say, how do we make a slightly cheaper private jet, or how do we make commercial first class slightly more private?
They asked a totally different question.
Right. They asked, why do customers choose commercial, low variable costs? Why do they choose private jets? Speed and flexibility.
So NetJets decided to extract the defining strengths from both alternatives and just completely eliminate the rest.
They introduced the concept of fractional ownership. Instead of buying a whole jet, a corporation could buy a 1/16th share of an aircraft. This entitled them to 50 hours of flight time a year.
And the result? You get the speed, the convenience, the privacy, and the regional airport access of a private jet. But because you only own a fraction, your fixed costs and your capital investment are drastically lower.
Much more aligned with the variable cost model of flying commercial first class.
And they solve the deadhead problem entirely. Because NetJets manages a massive distributed fleet of aircraft, they guarantee a plane will be available for you with just a few hours' notice virtually anywhere in the country.
They just route the nearest available plane to you. The customer never pays for deadhead time again.
It was a brilliant reconstruction of market boundaries. To the executives, it felt like they owned a private jet. To the accounting department, it felt like they were buying block commercial tickets.
By looking across alternative industries, NetJets made the existing competition completely irrelevant. In less than 20 years, they grew larger than many major commercial airlines.
We see this play out in tech, too. The book mentions NTT Docomo in Japan, which is a fascinating case study from the late 90s.
The iMode service.
Yes, they created iMode, which was essentially the precursor to the modern smartphone experience. And they did it by looking at two alternatives: traditional voice-only cell phones and navigating the internet on personal computers.
You really have to picture the technological landscape of the late 90s. The internet was exploding, but cell phones were still these brick-like devices used strictly for talking.
Right. If you wanted information on the go, your alternatives were severely limited. You could call a human being on your mobile phone and ask them for information.
Or you could go home, sit down at a bulky desktop PC, wait for the agonizing dial-up modem to connect, and search the web.
Docomo realized that the Japanese public desperately wanted the vast, dynamic information of the internet, but they wanted the mobility and the immediate access of a cell phone.
Now, early attempts at this in the West, a technology called WAP, failed miserably.
Miserably.
And they failed because Western telecom companies didn't look at alternatives. They just tried to cram a substitute. They tried to take the entire desktop internet experience with all its complex graphics and clunky navigation and literally force it onto a tiny monochrome cell phone screen.
It took forever to load, it was impossible to read, and consumers hated it.
Docomo didn't make that mistake. They looked at the alternatives and extracted only the specific elements that provided value.
So from the PC internet alternative, they didn't take the rich graphics. They took the core data news, weather, train schedules, and email.
And from the cell phone alternative, they took mobility, ease of use, and instant-on capability. They didn't try to build a pocket computer.
They created iMode, a radically simple text-based data service with a dedicated physical iMode button right on the phone. You press one button and you instantly have the train schedule.
It perfectly bridged those two alternatives. It bypassed the nightmare of dial-up, and it bypassed the uselessness of a voice-only phone. And it became an unprecedented cultural phenomenon in Japan.
Another highly relatable example is the Home Depot. Think about the alternatives for a homeowner wanting to renovate a kitchen or build a deck before Home Depot existed.
You essentially had two stark choices. You could hire a professional, union contractor. This gave you high expertise, a guaranteed result, and zero personal labor. But it was incredibly expensive.
Or your alternative was the local mom-and-pop hardware store. You do it yourself. It's much cheaper, but the friction is immense.
The local store has a tiny inventory. So you're driving to the lumberyard for wood, the plumbing supply store for pipes, and the hardware store for nails.
And worse, you are completely on your own in terms of knowledge. If you don't know how to sweat a copper pipe, the cashier at the local hardware store probably can't teach you.
The Home Depot looked at those two alternatives and realized they could pull the best from both. They built massive warehouse-style stores that offer the low prices and comprehensive inventory of the ultimate do-it-yourself experience.
And this was the genius stroke, they hired actual former tradespeople. Retired plumbers, electricians, and carpenters were brought in to walk the aisles.
They took the defining value of the expensive contractor, the expertise, and gave it away for free inside a low-cost retail environment.
They completely removed the psychological barrier of DIY. A homeowner could walk in, buy cheap materials, and get a 10-minute masterclass on how to install a sink from a guy who did it professionally for 30 years.
That fundamentally changed the objective. It wasn't just about buying a hammer. It was about the empowerment of improving your own home.
That completely shifts the paradigm. So the question you have to ask yourself isn't, how do I beat the guy making a slightly better version of my product?
You have to ask, why would my customers choose a completely different industry over me? What is the core objective they are actually trying to achieve? And how can I isolate the key advantages of that alternative while ruthlessly eliminating its pain points?
Which brings us to a really interesting pivot. We've talked about looking entirely outside the building, outside the industry. But what happens if the hidden market is actually trapped inside your industry, just hidden between imaginary tiers?
That's the second lens we need to look through. Path number 2, looking across strategic groups.
To navigate this, we first need to define what a strategic group actually is. In almost every mature industry, companies naturally clump together into groups based on the strategy they pursue.
Right. And these groups are almost always ranked in a strict hierarchical order based on two metrics: price and performance.
The easiest way to visualize this is the auto industry. You have your economy cars, your Honda Civics, your base model Fords. That's one strategic group competing on low price and basic reliability.
Then you have your mid-tier group. And then way up at the top, you have your luxury strategic group: Mercedes, BMW, Jaguar. They compete on high price, elite performance, and status.
Precisely. And the problem is that companies within these groups become obsessively internally focused.
If you are the CEO of BMW, you are spending 100% of your time analyzing what Mercedes and Audi are doing. You are trying to out-engineer them, out-market them, outprice them within your specific tier.
You pay absolutely no attention to what Honda's doing because you don't consider them competition. You assume the boundaries between the economy group and the luxury group are impenetrable walls.
But the magic happens when you ignore the walls and ask a different question. Why do customers trade up to the higher group, and why do they trade down to the lower group?
Which brings us back to that incredible story I teased at the very beginning, Curves, the fitness franchise that absolutely revolutionized women's health.
Curves is a phenomenal case study in looking across strategic groups. Let's go back to 1995. The U.S. fitness industry was heavily saturated and hyper-competitive, but it was strictly divided into two main strategic groups.
At the high end, you had traditional health clubs. These were the massive, expensive gyms with Olympic pools, indoor tennis courts, rows of complicated cardiovascular machines, juice bars, and luxurious locker rooms.
The assumption was that more features meant more value. But let's talk about the pain points of that high-end strategic group for the average woman who just wanted to stay healthy.
The pain points were immense, primarily psychological and logistical. Traditional gyms were incredibly intimidating.
They were full of wall-to-wall mirrors. They were often dominated by men grunting and lifting heavy free weights. For a woman who might be out of shape, the gym felt like a stage where she was being judged.
Furthermore, working out, there was a massive time commitment. You had to pack a gym bag, commute, fight for a parking spot, change in a crowded locker room, spend an hour figuring out the machines, shower, and commute back.
It was a 2-hour ordeal, and it was expensive.
So if a woman wanted to avoid all that, she traded down to the alternative strategic group, the home exercise program. This was the golden era of Jane Fonda workout tapes, Richard Simmons, or buying a Nordic track for your living room.
The appeal of the home exercise group was clear. It was cheap. You buy the VHS tape once. It was completely private. And it was highly flexible. You could do it whenever you wanted.
But why did it fail for so many people?
Yeah.
Why did people inevitably trade up from home exercise back to the dreaded gym?
Because working out in your living room lacks the two things you actually need to see results: motivation and adequate equipment. It is vastly too easy to hit the pause button on the VCR and sit on the couch.
You lack the discipline of a structured environment, and you certainly don't have a full circuit of resistance machines in your den.
Curves looked across these two distinct groups and realized there was an ocean of women who were fundamentally unserved by both. The high-end gym was too intimidating and time-consuming. The low-end home workout was too isolating and ineffective.
Curves decided to create a space right in the middle. But wait, let me push back on this for a second. If you take elements from the top tier and elements from the bottom tier, aren't you just creating a compromised, middle-of-the-road product?
Like a watered-down gym.
Yeah. If Curve strips out the locker rooms, the pool, and the juice bar, aren't they just creating a budget gym? Like a discount motel version of a health club? How is that a blue ocean rather than just a cheap red ocean?
That is exactly the trap of conventional thinking, and it's why the established gyms laughed at Curves initially. It is only a compromise if you are stripping away things the customer actually values.
Okay.
Curves realized that for their specific target market, women who wanted to get in shape without judgment and without wasting time, the lack of a pool wasn't a compromise, it was a massive relief.
Because they didn't want to use it anyway.
Exactly. It meant they didn't have to subsidize the cost of a pool they were never going to swim in.
So it's about value innovation, not value compromise. They eliminated the massive fixed costs of the traditional gym. They got rid of the prime real estate tag. Curve's locations were usually in cheap strip malls.
They got rid of the showers. They got rid of the mirrors entirely. They explicitly banned men.
By relentlessly eliminating those costly elements, they could drop the membership price significantly.
Yeah.
But here is where the innovation happens. They didn't just cut costs. They simultaneously raised the elements that provided motivation and efficiency.
They designed a proprietary circuit of hydraulic resistance machines that didn't require any adjusting. You just get on and push. And they arranged those machines in a circle, facing inward.
That circle is pure psychological genius. Instead of staring at yourself in a mirror or staring at a TV screen, you are facing the other women in the circuit. You talk to each other. You encourage each other.
It built a non-judgmental community, and the circuit combined cardiovascular and strength training into a highly structured, fast-paced 30-minute workout. You walk in, you do the circle twice, you walk out.
You get the motivation, the social accountability, and the equipment of the expensive health club, combined with the low price, privacy, and time efficiency of the home workout tape. Curves wasn't a slightly worse gym. It was an entirely new category of fitness experience.
And it was wildly successful. Because it was so cheap to open a franchise, they expanded globally at lightning speed. We see this exact same dynamic borrowing the magic from the top tier and the accessibility of the bottom tier in other industries too. Think about Ralph Lauren.
Cole Ralph Lauren is a masterclass in looking across strategic groups in fashion. Before them, you had the high-end haute couture group, the designer names in Paris and Milan. It offered incredible elegance, luxurious materials, and massive status.
But haute couture is prohibitively expensive. And worse, it's highly transient. The styles change every single season. If you buy a runway piece, it might be out of fashion in 6 months.
Then you had the classical traditional menswear group. Think Brooks Brothers or Pendleton. Very classic, very timeless, very durable. But it lacked that elite designer fashion magic. It felt a bit stuffy.
Ralph Lauren looked at both and created what was essentially high fashion with no fashion. They captured the designer namesake branding and the luxurious, elegant marketing of haute couture.
But they combined it with the updated, classical, timeless look of the traditional group. You bought a polo sweater, and it had the status of designer fashion, but you could wear it for 10 years without it looking dated.
They captured customers trading down from haute couture who wanted longevity, and customers trading up from traditional wear who wanted status.
Lexus did the exact same thing to the auto industry in the late 1980s. Toyota looked at the luxury group Mercedes, BMW, which offered impeccable German engineering and prestige, but at premium prices with high maintenance costs.
And they saw the near-luxury group Cadillac, Lincoln, which were more affordable and spacious, but lacked that elite engineering cachet and build quality.
Toyota spent billions developing the Lexus LS 400 to offer the rigorous quality, the silent cabin, and the elite dealership experience of the high-end German group, but they priced it much closer to the lower-end American luxury group.
They completely dominated that white space by eliminating the bloated pricing of the top tier while raising the engineering standards of the bottom tier.
It totally reframes how you look at pricing tiers. You don't have to stay in your lane. If you map out the strategic groups in your field and figure out the deep underlying reasons why buyers trade up to a higher group and why they trade down to a lower group, you can build a product right in the middle that steals from both.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've looked at alternative industries, and we've looked at strategic groups. Now we need to look at path 3. We need to look at the who. Who is actually doing the buying?
This is where things get really fascinating because it deals with the complexity of human motivation. In almost every industry, competitors converge around a single, unified definition of who the target customer is.
They build all their marketing around one person.
Right. All their sales channels, all their product features built around that one hypothetical person. But in reality, B2B and B2C sales rarely involve just one person. There is almost always a chain of buyers.
The authors break this chain down into 3 distinct links. You have the purchasers, the people who actually control the budget and write the check. You have the users, the people who actually interact with the product on a daily basis. And you have the influencers, the experts, whose opinions dictate the final choice.
And the blue ocean question is, what happens when the person holding the wallet has completely different values and pain points than the person actually using the tool? Because they usually do.
And if you challenge your industry's conventional wisdom about which link in the chain to target, you can force a massive shift in how a product is designed.
The classic example the book uses here is from the pharmaceutical industry, specifically Novo Nordisk, the Danish insulin producer. To really grasp the magnitude of what they did, we have to understand the history of diabetes treatment.
For decades, the entire insulin industry was locked in a fierce, bloody red ocean battle. And they were entirely focused on one specific link in the buyer chain: the influencers, the doctors.
Because insulin is a prescription medication, the patient doesn't walk into a pharmacy and choose a brand. The doctor dictates the choice.
So if you are an insulin manufacturer in the 1970s or 80s, you are putting all your R&D money into impressing the doctor. What do doctors care about? Clinical purity.
They want the most biologically perfect, chemically pure insulin possible. So companies spent billions engineering slightly purer human insulin to win favor with the doctors.
But while they were doing that, they completely ignored the daily lived reality of the users, the diabetic patients themselves. Novo Nordisk decided to break from the pack. They stopped obsessing over the doctors and started observing the patients.
And what they found was a nightmare of friction.
It's hard to overstate how difficult the daily routine was for a diabetic back then. You didn't just pop a pill. You had to carry around delicate glass vials of liquid insulin, which often needed refrigeration.
You had to carry separate, terrifying-looking medical syringes if you were out at a business lunch or on a romantic date or traveling and you needed to manage your blood sugar. You had to excuse yourself, go to a public restroom, draw liquid from a vial into a syringe, and inject yourself.
The clinical purity of the insulin wasn't the patient's primary pain point. The pain point was the massive social stigma, the lack of discretion, and the sheer logistical hassle of administering the drug. It made patients feel sick, clinical, and different.
So Novo Nordisk realized the blue ocean wasn't in the chemistry, it was in the delivery mechanism. In 1985, they shifted their target from the influencer to the user. They invented the Novelet and later the Novo pen.
This was an absolute game changer. It was an insulin delivery system designed to look exactly like a sleek, high-end fountain pen.
It was a brilliant piece of engineering. It contained a pre-filled cartridge of insulin. You didn't need a separate vial or syringe. You just took out this elegant pen, clicked the top to dial up your exact prescribed dosage, and discreetly injected it.
It completely removed the stigma. You could pull it out at a restaurant table, and to anyone walking by, it just looked like you were holding a nice Mont Blanc pen.
Yeah.
It was convenient, it was self-contained, and it gave the patient their dignity back.
Novo Nordisk completely bypassed the clinical obsession of the doctors and won the absolute loyalty of the patients. The patients demanded the Novo pen, which basically forced the doctors to prescribe it. It changed the entire trajectory of the company.
We see this exact same dynamic play out in the B2B financial world with Bloomberg. Before Michael Bloomberg launched his terminal in the early 1980s, the financial information industry, companies like Reuters and Telerate, were entirely focused on the purchasers.
And in a massive Wall Street investment bank, the purchaser is the IT manager. They are the ones who control the technology budget.
Now, what does a 1980s IT manager value? They value standardization. They want every computer to look the same, use the same cables, and run the same software. They value cost control and ease of maintenance. So Reuters provided data feeds in a format that made the IT managers happy.
But Bloomberg ignored the IT managers. He looked at the users, the actual traders and financial analysts sitting on the trading floor. These are the people making split-second decisions involving millions of dollars.
The trader doesn't give a damn about standardized IT protocols. The trader cares about speed, analytical edge, and making sense of a chaotic flood of information.
You have to picture a 1980s trading floor. It was chaos. A trader would be looking at raw, scrolling data feeds on a screen. If they wanted to calculate the fair market value of a bond, they had to take their eyes off the screen, grab a pencil, a piece of paper, and a physical calculator, crunch the numbers, and then execute the trade.
In the 10 seconds it took to do the math, the market might have moved, and they lost the trade.
It was slow, prone to errors, and highly stressful. So Bloomberg built a terminal specifically engineered for the psychology and workflow of the trader. He completely ignored IT standards. The Bloomberg terminal had dual monitors, which was unheard of at the time.
It had built-in proprietary analytical software that ran complex yield calculations instantly with the push of a button.
And they built a specialized custom keyboard. Instead of a standard QWERTY layout, the Bloomberg keyboard had color-coded keys for specific asset classes, yellow for corporate bonds, green for commodities.
It allowed a trader to navigate complex data with muscle memory, saving precious fractions of a second.
They even added features that an IT manager would consider completely frivolous, but that a high-stress trader loved. They added secure messaging, which became the precursor to Wall Street's internal chat networks. They added the ability to buy flowers, look up real estate listings, or check sports scores during market lulls.
So how did Bloomberg actually make the sale if he ignored the person holding the budget? This is the mechanism of internal corporate politics. A trader at an investment bank is a massive profit center. They are generating millions of dollars in revenue.
The IT department is a cost center.
When a star trader realizes that a Bloomberg terminal allows them to calculate bond yields 10 times faster than the guy at the rival bank, they don't ask the IT manager for permission. They demand the terminal.
And because they bring in the money, their demand overrides the IT department's desire for standardization. Bloomberg used the sheer profit-generating power of the user to force the purchaser's hand.
It's a perfect illustration of how challenging the accepted target buyer unlocks new value.
Yeah.
Industries fall into deep habits. They benchmark each other, they go to the same conferences, and they accept the status quo of who they are supposed to sell to.
If you map out the chain of buyers in your industry, the purchasers, users, and influencers, and purposefully shift your focus to a different link in that chain, you will inevitably discover entirely new pain points to solve.
It fundamentally changes the product. Now let's move to the next boundary path 4, which is all about what happens outside the product itself. Looking across complementary product and service offerings, the narrative transition here is that once the buyer actually has your product in their hands, they don't use it in a vacuum.
The critical question is, what happens 30 seconds before, during, and 30 seconds after they use it?
This is about defining the total solution that buyers are seeking. Very few products are used in total isolation. But just like with target buyers, industries tend to define the scope of their responsibility very narrowly.
If you make a television, you only care about the picture quality. You don't consider the fact that the customer has to figure out how to mount it on a wall or deal with a tangled mess of cables. But untapped value is almost always hidden in the friction of those complementary products and services.
The book uses a fantastic, counterintuitive example from the heavy industrial world. NABI, a Hungarian bus company. They were trying to break into the U.S. municipal transport market.
Now, the unwritten accepted law of competition in this specific industry was that U.S. city municipalities bought transit buses based almost entirely on one single factor, the lowest initial purchase price.
Which makes sense on the surface. Municipalities are dealing with taxpayer money. They are on tight, heavily scrutinized budgets. If City Council needs 50 new buses, they're going to award the contract to the lowest bidder.
So every manufacturer was locked in a red ocean, cutting corners to make the cheapest possible bus.
But NDI looked past the initial purchase. They looked at the total solution. They asked, what happens to this bus after the city buys it? They discovered that municipalities keep these transit buses in active, brutal city circulation for 12 years on average.
And during those 12 years, the complementary costs of maintenance and operation were astronomical. These traditional buses were manufactured out of heavy steel. What happens to steel in a snowy city that salts its roads?
It rusts entirely through.
Yes. The heavy weight of the steel meant the buses required massive layered engines that burned through staggering amounts of diesel fuel. And because these buses are constantly navigating tight city traffic, they get into minor accidents all the time.
Repairing a dented steel body panel requires cutting, welding, beating out the dent, and repainting. It takes the bus off the road for days.
NABI realized that the city's real pain point wasn't the invoice on day one, it was the bleeding of cash over the next 4,000 days. So they completely changed the scope of their offering. They decided to build their buses out of fiberglass instead of steel.
Which sounds completely insane if you were playing by the industry's rules. Fiberglass was significantly more expensive to manufacture than steel. The initial purchase price of an ABI bus was visibly higher than the competition.
I can just imagine the pushback on this. You're a salesperson trying to convince a skeptical city council to spend more upfront taxpayer money when your competitor is offering a cheaper vehicle. How do you win that bid?
You win it by changing the math of the bid entirely. NABI stopped competing on initial price and showed them the life cycle cost.
They said, yes, we are 10% more expensive today, but fiberglass doesn't rust, so your corrosion maintenance budget goes to zero. Fiberglass is drastically lighter, which means we can install smaller engines, which will save you hundreds of thousands of dollars in diesel fuel.
And when a fiberglass bus gets into a fender bender, your mechanics don't need to weld. They just cut out the damaged fiberglass panel and literally glue a prefabricated new one in. It takes hours instead of days.
They shifted the entire paradigm. By looking at the complementary services of fuel, maintenance, and repair, they created a blue ocean of long-term value. They didn't just sell a bus, they sold a massive reduction in operating headaches.
And they quickly captured a huge share of the U.S. market. We see a very different but equally brilliant example in the consumer goods space with Philips Electronics. They were looking at the British tea kettle industry.
The market was completely flat. Profits were shrinking. It was a classic red ocean where every manufacturer was just trying to make a kettle that boiled water 3 seconds faster or offered a slightly sleeker design.
But Philips stopped looking at the kettle and looked at the complementary product that is absolutely essential to using a tea kettle, the water itself. Specifically, British tap water.
Right. And the fundamental problem in Britain was that the tap water in many areas was full of limescale. When you boiled the tap water in a standard kettle, the heat caused the scale to precipitate out.
And you'd pour your freshly brewed cup of tea only to find these gross, chalky white flakes floating on the surface.
It's a huge pain point. It ruins the experience. But historically, what did people do? They bought a separate, bulky water filter pitcher, filtered the water, and then poured it into the kettle. Or they just dealt with the flakes.
And the kettle manufacturers didn't care. Their stance was, our job is to heat the water. The quality of the water isn't our department.
Philips realized that the customer's objective wasn't boiling water. The objective was a perfect cup of tea. So they simply added a small, inexpensive mesh mouth filter to the spout of the kettle.
It is so elegantly simple. As you poured the boiling water, the filter caught the scale before it hit the teacup. It solved a massive complementary pain point for pennies.
And it kickstarted a massive new growth trajectory for Philips because suddenly every household in Britain had a compelling reason to throw away their perfectly functional old kettle and buy the new filtered one.
It's a profound shift in perspective. If you only focus on your product, you miss the friction surrounding it. Think about the movie theater example we discussed earlier. The cinema operator is obsessing over the projection screen, the seats, and the popcorn.
But what are the invisible, complementary barriers preventing a couple from buying a ticket in the first place?
Babysitters and parking. Finding a reliable babysitter is a stressful, expensive negotiation. Finding parking downtown on a Friday night is a nightmare that starts the evening off with an argument.
If the babysitter cancels or the parking garage is full, the couple goes home. The cinema loses the revenue, not because the movie was bad, but because the complimentary services failed.
Exactly. A cinema operator who thinks outside the boundaries might partner with a local vetted childcare service or validate parking at a nearby garage, completely eliminating the pain points that happen before the customer even walks through the door.
That completely changes how I view competitors and friction. It's not just about making a better product, it's about making the consumption of the product seamless.
Okay, let's pivot to the fifth boundary, Path 5. which moves us from physical logistics into pure psychology. It's about looking across the functional or emotional appeal to buyers.
This one is fascinating because it deals with the unconscious conditioning of markets. Over time, industries tend to entrench themselves into competing on one of two bases. They either compete on rational or functional appeal, or they compete on emotional appeal.
Let's define those. A functionally oriented industry competes almost entirely on price, raw utility, and practical performance. Think of cement or discount airlines. It's about getting the job done efficiently.
And an emotionally oriented industry competes on feelings, status, luxurious extras, and pampering. Think of high-end cosmetics, luxury watches, or boutique hotels.
The problem is that once an industry chooses an orientation, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The company's behavior continually reinforces the consumer's expectations.
If you survey customers in an emotional industry, they will simply echo back the industry's own logic. They will say they want more emotional extras for a slightly lower price, but blue oceans are often found by deliberately flipping the orientation.
If your industry is emotional, strip it down and make it functional. If it's functional, add a layer of emotion.
Let's look at an incredible example of shifting from emotional to functional. QB House in Japan. For decades, the Japanese barbershop industry was a highly emotional, deeply entrenched ritual. It wasn't just a place to get your hair cut, it was a sanctuary of pampering.
The process was incredibly elaborate. You went in and they greeted you with hot towels, they gave you a shoulder massage, they served you tea. The barber would perform intricate hair and scalp treatments.
The whole process took an hour or more, and it cost around 3,000 to 5,000 yen, which translates to roughly 27 to 45 US dollars.
The entire industry assumed that this pampering was exactly what Japanese men wanted. It was an unquestioned truth. But QB House looked at the shifting culture of Japan.
In the 1990s, the Japanese economy was stagnating. Corporate salarymen were working brutal hours. And QB House realized that for a massive segment of the working population, this emotional ritual wasn't a luxury. It was a frustrating, time-consuming pain point.
Busy professionals didn't want to waste an hour of their precious day off sitting in a barber chair. And they didn't want to pay $40 for hot towels and a shoulder rub they didn't really need. They just wanted to look sharp for the office and get back to their lives.
So QB House did the unthinkable. They stripped away all the emotional extras, they eliminated the hot towels, they eliminated the massages, they stopped serving tea.
They created a purely functional, highly efficient business model. A haircut took exactly 10 minutes, and it cost a flat 1,000 yen, about $9.
They even innovated on the cleanup process to maximize efficiency. In a traditional barbershop, after the cut, the barber has to take time to wash the customer's hair to remove loose clippings, which requires plumbing, towels, and time.
QB House invented what they called an air wash system. It was a vacuum hose that dropped down from the ceiling. The barber simply ran it over the customer's head to instantly suck away all the loose hair. It was hygienic, incredibly fast, and purely functional.
Now, put yourself in the shoes of a traditional barber watching this happen. Stripping away the hot towels and the massage feels like you are destroying the soul of the business. It feels like a massive risk to degrade the product that much.
But it wasn't a degradation. QB House was just revealing a completely different customer base that was being radically overserved by the emotional extras. QB House exploded in popularity because they gave people their time back.
It is the ultimate proof that more features do not always equal more value. Now, let's look at the exact reverse. Shifting an industry from purely functional to deeply emotional. Cemex, the world's third largest cement producer, executed this brilliantly in Mexico.
If there is any product on earth that is purely functional, it is cement. It is gray powder in a paper sack. And in Mexico, the vast majority of cement wasn't sold to massive corporate developers. It was sold in retail bags directly to the average citizen, the do-it-yourselfer.
And we have to understand the socioeconomic context here. These were often families living in poverty, slowly trying to build an addition to their home, a new bedroom, a concrete roof, over many, many years.
They would save up a few pesos, buy a few bags of cement, and build a tiny section of a wall.
And the logistics of this were a nightmare. If they bought materials and didn't use them immediately, the materials could be stolen. If it rained, the cement powder was ruined. It took an average family 4 to 7 years just to build one additional room.
It was a market driven entirely by price and raw, frustrating functionality.
Cemex realized they weren't just selling gray powder. They were selling the profound human dream of a better, safer home for a family. So they decided to shift the orientation of cement from functional to emotional.
They did this by tapping into a deep, existing Mexican cultural tradition called the tanda.
The Tanda is a community savings scheme. A group of neighbors pool their money together. Every week, everyone chips in a small amount, and one person in the group gets the whole pot to make a large, necessary purchase. It relies on social pressure and community trust.
CEMEX created a program called Patrimonio Hoy that institutionalized this tradition specifically for building materials. But they didn't just act as a bank offering financing. They infused emotion and support into the entire grueling process of construction.
They sold the Dream of the Room edition. They provided professional architectural blueprints so the families weren't just guessing at the engineering. They offered expert advice on how to pour the concrete safely.
And crucially, when a family finally finished a room, CEMEX would step in and sponsor small-town festivities to celebrate the achievement.
They threw a party. They turned the slow, frustrating pouring of concrete into a massive community celebration of progress, family, and upward mobility. They shifted the product from a dull, heavy commodity to an emotional milestone.
And the result was staggering. Families participating in the program built rooms 3 times faster than the national average. Demand for CEMEX cement soared.
They created a massive blue ocean in a market that every other competitor thought was purely driven by shaving pennies off the price of a bag of powder.
It's an inspiring example. It proves that you can manipulate the emotional resonance of literally anything, even cement. The takeaway here is to audit your own industry. Does it compete on dry functionality or luxurious emotion?
If it's emotional, what costly extras can you ruthlessly strip out to make it functionally simple and cheap? If it's functional, what emotional layer like community, celebration, or status can you add to transform a commodity into a meaningful experience?
Okay, we are rounding the corner to the 6th and final boundary, Path 6. We've challenged the boundaries of the present, the alternative industries, the strategic tiers, the buyers, the related services, and the emotions. Now, we have to challenge the boundary of time itself. Look across time.
All industries are subject to external trends that affect their business over time. New technologies emerge, government regulations shift, macroeconomic conditions change, but the problem is that most companies adapt to these trends passively and incrementally.
They just react as events unfold, trying to keep their heads above water.
Or, even worse, they actively try to fight the trend and stubbornly maintain the status quo. But blue ocean strategists look at trends differently. They don't just react, they project.
They ask, what would the market look like if this specific trend were taken to its absolute logical conclusion?
Now, let's be very clear about what this entails. This is not about predicting the future. Predicting the future with a crystal ball is a fool's errand.
Looking across time is about finding insight in trends that are already highly observable today, and then working backward to see what must be changed right now to unlock the new ocean.
But how do you know which trends to bet on? Because it is so incredibly easy to mistake a passing cultural fad for a world-changing trend. If you redesign your company based on a fad, you're dead.
The authors provide 3 strict criteria for evaluating a trend. To form the basis of a blue ocean strategy, a trend must be 3 things. First, it must be decisive to your business.
It has to actually impact your core operations or your customers' behavior, not just be interesting news.
Second, it must be irreversible. It's not a pendulum swinging back and forth. It is a one-way street of structural change. And third, it must have a clear trajectory. You need to be able to see the end state of where it's going.
The quintessential textbook example of this is Apple's creation of iTunes. We have to go back to the late 90s and early 2000s to understand the sheer panic of the music industry.
This was the era of the MP3 and illegal file sharing. You had Napster, Kazaa, LimeWire. Millions of people, mostly kids, were downloading music for free.
And how did the traditional record labels react? They fought the trend with everything they had. They sued their own customers, they sued teenagers, they tried to put complex digital locks on physical CDs to prevent ripping.
They viewed the trend entirely as a hostile threat to their existing red ocean model, which relied on forcing consumers to buy a $15 physical CD just to get the one-hit song they actually wanted.
But Steve Jobs and Apple looked at the trend through the 3 criteria. Was digital music decisive to their business? Yes, Apple was building computers and soon digital devices like the iPod.
Was the trend irreversible? Absolutely. Consumers had tasted the magic of having thousands of songs on a hard drive, and they were never going back to carrying around bulky binders of physical CDs.
Did it have a clear trajectory? Yes. Broadband internet speeds were increasing rapidly, and digital storage was getting cheaper by the month. The future was undeniably digital delivery.
So instead of fighting the trend, or just complaining about piracy, Apple imagined the world where that trend had fully arrived. What would a legitimate, mass-market digital music space look like?
And crucially, they looked closely at the illegal file-sharing ecosystem and realized it was actually full of massive pain
Oh,
points.
with a terrible user experience. If you remember trying to download a song on Kazaa, half the time the file was mislabeled. You'd wait 20 minutes for a download, open it, and it was a completely different song. Or it was just a recording of static.
The audio quality was wildly inconsistent. Downloads would fail halfway through, and the worst part was that you were constantly risking downloading a vicious computer virus that could destroy your entire hard drive. It was a digital Wild West.
Apple realized that people didn't necessarily want to steal music. They just wanted the extreme convenience of digital tracks. And they wanted the freedom to buy a la carte just the one song they liked without buying the whole album.
So Apple built the iTunes Music Store. They negotiated fiercely with the terrified record labels to offer high-quality, legal, guaranteed song downloads for 99 cents each.
They saved users the hassle, the bad sound quality, and the viruses. They created a seamless, elegant, trustworthy solution that integrated flawlessly with their iPod hardware.
They didn't invent digital music, and they certainly didn't invent downloading. They just looked across time, saw the irreversible trend of digital delivery, and built a blue ocean product for that reality while the record labels were still busy suing their customers.
And in doing so, they revolutionized the music industry, created a massive new revenue stream, and laid the foundation for Apple becoming one of the most valuable companies in human history.
The lesson here is to look at the megatrends affecting your space right now. Instead of reacting defensively to protect your legacy business, imagine the world where that trend has fully arrived. What does the customer need in that reality? Build that today.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground here. Let's try to synthesize all of this. We've walked through the 6 paths. Look across alternative industries, strategic groups, buyer chains, complementary offerings, emotional appeals, and time.
If we pull all of these diverse examples together, from fractional jets to fiberglass buses to Japanese barbershops, the soul of this chapter, the core overarching insight, is this. Market realities are not fixed.
They are not laws of physics.
No, they are entirely constructed by the shared, unquestioned assumptions of the people working within them.
The moment you realize that those walls are imaginary, you have the power to walk right through them. Creating the blue ocean isn't about being a visionary genius who wakes up with a magical, unprecedented idea. It is a structured, deliberate, methodical process of shifting your perspective.
You are looking at the exact same data as your competitors. You face the same economic conditions, the same supply chain issues, the same customers.
But by systematically applying these 6 lenses, you force your brain out of its rut. You shift from head-to-head competition, fighting over scraps in a bloody red ocean, to true value innovation.
You make the competition totally irrelevant because you are playing a completely different game.
So, you now have the roadmap to redraw the boundaries of your world and find your blue ocean. But here's the next massive hurdle. Once you've found that brilliant idea, once you know you need to build the Curves gym or the iTunes store, how do you zoom out and actually build a strategy that won't get bogged down in spreadsheets, budgets, and corporate red tape?
That is the immense challenge of strategic planning, and frankly, it's where most blue ocean ideas go to die. They get suffocated by traditional corporate planning processes that demand historical data for a market that doesn't exist yet.
And that is exactly what we will uncover next time as we explore Chapter 4 and learn how to focus on the big picture and leave the numbers behind. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll see you on the next deep dive. But before we go, I want you to think back to that riverboat gambler we talked about at the very beginning.
The executive who thinks innovation requires betting the entire company on a blind hunch.
Exactly. The truth is, the biggest gamble you can make is assuming that the walls around you are permanent. What invisible boundary are you accepting as truth today?
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.